Hey, everybody.
Hi, Nuria.
Just checking to see if you can hear me. Not that I need to speak today.
Y'all quieted down quick. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 18th, 2024 meeting of the Boulder City Council. And we are back in Council chambers after a few weeks off for renovations with some new audio and video equipment. And we may need adjustment time as we learn the new system, so we'll be fine-tuning as we go along. So please give us a little grace and patience. But before we get into the meeting, I want to give a huge thank you to the folks who were responsible for this renovation. So the project was managed by Nick Joseph and was worked on by Ryan Albahari, Don Mulvey, Paco Hyam, Alexa Landis, and Sam Kasovic. And our contractor was Ford AV. So big thank you to everyone involved in that project. And with that, I will go ahead and call our meeting to order and ask Elish to do our roll call, please.
Let me remember what my button is. All right. We'll start tonight roll call as usual with Councilmember Adams.
Present.
Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Marquis.
Here.
Shuhard.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Spear.
Present.
Councilmember Wallach is absent. And Councilmember Weiner.
Present.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thanks so much, Elisha. And if we could start with a motion to amend the agenda to add item 1C, a public safety power shutoff discussion with Xcel Energy.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous. The agenda is amended. And so now we're going to go into our first agenda item, which is item 1A, an Earth Day declaration presented by Councilmember Adams. Taish, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. Every year on April 22nd, we celebrate our natural environment, and bring awareness to the ongoing need to build more resilient systems that protect our community from the threats of climate change. From the 2013 floods to the 2021 Marshall Fire, we have already felt climate change in Boulder. Communities across the world are forced to confront dangerous climate events. The most severe damage is sustained in the least resilient places, deepening disparities and weakening already vulnerable communities. This hurt has been inflicted by human systems that extract, degrade, and harm our planet. Humanity has a practical and ethical obligation to redefine, redesign, and recover a healthy relationship with the natural world. Our community has a legacy of adaptive leadership and taking a holistic approach to climate action. We were some of the first in the nation to trailblaze efforts like curbside recycling and municipal carbon taxes on electricity. Our ambitious citywide climate goals are set, pursued, and periodically updated in accordance with scientific consensus on the level of carbon reduction needed to stabilize the planet. To meet these goals, our Climate Initiatives Department has evolved their work into 3 key action areas: energy systems, circular economy, and the nature-based climate solutions. Regionally, we collaboratively launched and continue to co-lead a vanguard group called Colorado Communities for Climate Action. This coalition of 42 local governments sets aggressive targets and networks with other jurisdictions to share best practices and advance the field. At the state level, our city leaders collaborate year after year to advance policies that grow green jobs, empower local approaches, improve how we handle materials, and identify and build complementary solutions. Beyond Colorado, Boulder is an active member of several consortiums of city governments, such as the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the Local Governments for Sustainability, and the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. Our threats have no boundaries and no borders, nor does our commitment to solutions. We, the city of Boulder, declare April 22nd, 2024 as Earth Day and urge the community to celebrate the environments we call home and to share the city's efforts to slow climate change and build a more resilient and equitable community. Thank you.
Thank you, Taisha. All right, our next item is 1B, which is National Volunteer Appreciation Week Declaration, to be presented by myself. And if I could invite Brian Wegner and Jay Balzer up to the dais to receive the declaration, please. All the way up. This is the first time we've had a real microphone in my 8 years on council, so this is very exciting as well. All right, National Volunteer Appreciation Week, April 21st to 27th, 2024. In 2023, more than 4,000 volunteers contributed over 54,000 hours of service to the well-being of the Boulder community. The generosity and dedication of the city's volunteers make a significant impact in Boulder that cannot be overstated. There are many worthy causes to which people can dedicate their time, talents, and energy, and the Boulder City Council recognizes with gratitude the many volunteers that have chosen to give back to their community in this way. Volunteers provide incredible support to the city in many ways. Volunteers enhance community connections, have a profound impact on mental health, build new trails, support the health of our community, and so much more, including maintaining the beds in Admiral Burke Park, as you so ably do, Jay. Thanks for that. And time is one of the most valuable gifts that one can give, and for that we are deeply grateful. Community members are encouraged to look around for the thank you banners and signs that have been posted in different spots around town. The Boulder City Council hopes that every time volunteers see these signs, they will feel seen and understand the depth of the community's appreciations for all that they do. And so with that, we, the City Council of the City of Boulder, Colorado, declare April 21st to the 27th, 2024, as National Volunteer Appreciation Week. Very, yeah, a round of applause for that, please. And Brian, if we'll get to that. Brian, if only during declarations is actually our rules. Brian, would you like to say a couple words?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Brockett, and thank you, Council, for this this declaration. As one of the staff members that gets to work with volunteers day in and day out, I share your appreciation for their dedication. Since the pandemic, year over year, we've seen volunteers come back and serve. We had more volunteers come back year over year, and we've had more hours served year over year. That 54,000 hours equates to just about $2 million in value to the city of Boulder, in addition to all of the social benefits that you mentioned in the declaration. So I just want to say thank you to all of our volunteers, and I'm going to share, pass the mic off to Jay. As mentioned, Jay, you can find him volunteering at Admiral A. Burke Park, taking care of some of the flower beds and the grounds there. So,
thank you, Brian. Adam, I'm delighted to be here on behalf of the Military Officers Association of America. That's a national organization representing mostly retired military officers. We're the Boulder chapter, named after Arleigh Burke, a Boulder native, World War II hero that is commemorated by the park named for him over by Fraser Meadow. And we volunteer there year after year to maintain the flower beds. In the spring, we plant annuals. In the fall, we rip them out. We love doing it. We get about 5 or 6 members each year to do that. they enjoy it. Time's not an issue. We're mostly retired. I just want to mention the Admiral Arleigh Burke Park was a project, a partnership between our chapter here in Boulder and the city of Boulder 22 years ago. We worked with the city to create that interpretive display, that memorial for Admiral Burke. And so our participation with the city goes way beyond just volunteering to maintain the flower bed. And we're happy to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. Brian? Run back to my spot here. And now we'll go to item 1C, the public safety power shutoff discussion with Xcel Energy. And I'd like to invite Iffy Jennings, our Boulder area Xcel representative, to get this started for us. If you could please, Iffy.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Iffy Jennings, and I serve as the Community and Local Government Affairs Manager for Boulder County from Xcel Energy. As you know, our organization with the city operates on a partnership, and under that partnership is a governance structure that includes an executive committee. And on that executive committee are two executive leaders from the organization. Tonight I have with me, accompanied with me tonight is two members from that executive committee, Mr. Andrew Holder, who is the Director of Community Relations, and Mr. Robert Kinney, who is the PSCO President. I would like to now invite Mr. Kinney to share his insights on the recent wind events and respond to any questions that council has at the time. Thank you.
Good evening. Can you hear me well? Iffy, thank you very much. Andrew, thanks for being here. Mr. Mayor and Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council, thank you for this opportunity to be here with you and allowing us to speak. I'm Robert Kinney. I'm the president of Public Service Company of Colorado, and I have the privilege of leading Xcel Energy's operations here in the state of Colorado. Just a very brief intro of myself, not to give you my resume, but just to give you some insight into who I am and what I stand for. So I joined Public Service Company of Colorado in June of 2022. Prior to that, I was at Pacific Gas and Electric Company for 7 years, leading regulatory and external affairs, so federal, state regulatory affairs and governmental affairs at the local and state level. And I was at PG&E during much of the wildfire experience in Northern California. I am originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been a lawyer in private practice in the public sector and in the private sector, and had the privilege of serving on the State Public Utilities Commission in Missouri as well. And so my experience here is informed by all of those experiences, having been in the private and the public sector, and then having had some experience leading a utility during wildfire circumstances in California. So safety is the company's and my top priority, and it's the safety of our customers as well as the safety of our communities and our coworkers. We know that wildfire risk is rapidly evolving and changing, primarily driven by climate change. The risk today is greater than the risk even a year, 2 years, 3 years ago. Winds are more intense, conditions are drier, driven by drought, both in the atmosphere and on the ground. And as that risk continues to evolve, so too are the mitigations that we have to apply to mitigate that risk. So first, I want to just publicly acknowledge, we know we have opportunities to strengthen and improve our communications with our customers, with our communities, with critical facilities and first responders. We've heard that feedback loudly and clearly, and I suspect we'll hear more of it tonight. Second, I just want to maybe give a little bit more insight into the criteria that we applied. I know Colorado, Boulder, are no strangers to high winds. The high winds that we were experiencing on April 6th and leading up to the high wind events were in excess of what is even normally experienced. And so we have evidence that showed that there were 96, 97, 98 mile per hour winds, and in some places even in excess of 100 miles per hour. But that's not the only criteria that we applied. We also look at the atmospheric humidity, and so the relative humidity in the air, and then we look at the humidity and the fuel moisture, and so that's the dryness of the fuel on the ground, the grasses, the vegetation. And those criteria taken together, we're able to use wildfire modeling software that is able to predict the probability of an ignition happening, and then the potential consequence and spread of that ignition if one is to happen. And so you can imagine with 100-mile-per-hour winds, you not only have the risk of your equipment snapping in half, which we've seen, but you also have the risk of vegetation and other items blowing into your equipment and causing that equipment to fail and drop to the ground, ignite a fire, and then the risk of that fire spreading rapidly because of the nature of that high wind. The third item that I want to just really briefly touch on is the restoration process, and because we've heard a lot about the estimated times of restoration and the inability to provide accurate restoration times. Part of the challenge with providing definitive times of restoration has to do with the fact that when we de-energize a line, or when a line is damaged by virtue of high winds, we can't re-energize that line until we've actually physically inspected the line, either by one of our frontline workers walking the line or through the use of drones and helicopters. And we employ all of those. But as you might imagine, we can't fly drones and helicopters in the high wind, and we can't have our line workers out inspecting the lines until the wind event has concluded. And so what we saw on April 6th and 7th was that the expectation was that that wind event would begin at 3 p.m. on Saturday and would last until noon on Sunday. So it was always the case that we weren't going to be able to begin inspecting the lines until the wind event passed. And so it was never the case that power would be restored through a flip of the switch at noon on Sunday. And as you might imagine, the rationale behind that is if a line during the wind event had been damaged and had fallen to the ground, if we were to re-energize that line without having inspected it, then you create a wildfire risk. And so that's why the restoration time takes as long as it takes. We had over 600 miles of line that needed to be inspected visually, either by drone, helicopter, or walking that line. Fourth, I want to just talk about what we're going to do going forward. I did have the opportunity to listen to the public comment at the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. Didn't listen to all 3 hours yet, but I will. But I had the opportunity to listen, and I think we have a significant opportunity to partner with other community organizations, particularly those that are working with vulnerable customers that rely on medical equipment. And so we have an expectation that we will file an updated wildfire mitigation plan with the commission. That wildfire mitigation plan will describe our efforts to bolster our public safety power shutoff program. It'll describe our efforts to work closely with community organizations to protect the most vulnerable customers. The point that I really want to make is that we recognize that when you de-energize a line, you're potentially creating ancillary and additional risks. We can't take this tool out of the toolbox for all the reasons that I just cited with the nature of evolving wildfire risk, but we can mitigate those ancillary risks. And so we will be working closely with first responders, with our county emergency management personnel, and with other organizations that we haven't even yet identified to make sure that we're doing all that we can to protect those other customers. We are going to be announcing shortly here that we will be making a $50,000 donation to Community Food Share as an effort to really recognize the hardship that was caused to some of our food banks, and so we will be doing that. And again, I was able to listen to some of the CPUC and recognize that there are organizations like the Center for Inclusive Design and Engineers and Colorado Cross Disability Coalition that we can partner with to potentially work more closely with to help our customers that are on durable medical equipment. Finally, based on what we've seen, and by that I mean what we've heard from our frontline workers that have inspected the lines, photographic evidence that we've seen of the damage of trees falling into our lines, poles that were snapped by the high winds, we do remain confident that we made the right decision to de-energize the lines. It's impossible to prove a negative, but one can logically conclude from what we've seen that had we not de-energized the lines, we could have seen a wildfire ignite. And so public safety is our job one, and we're confident that we prevented a wildfire from happening. With that, I welcome your questions and look forward to hearing comments from the community.
Mr. Kenny, thanks so much for joining us today and for that explanation. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us here. And I'll look to my colleagues to see if folks have any questions. I have a few, but I'll look to other people first. Tara.
Hey there.
Hello.
I'm from the East Coast, so I apologize ahead of time if I'm sarcastic or have any of that East Coast thing. Don't take it personally. Thanks. Okay. You know, Shanahan Ridge and the wildland urban interface had their power on, but yet East Boulder and our business community at Pearl Street, nowhere near the wildland urban interface, had their power shut off. The community wants to know why you would do that. I personally live very close to I had my power on the whole time, and I live very close to the WUI. So that's question number one. Because it felt random to a lot of people.
So, and we've heard that feedback that even, customers that were on one side of the street saw their power de-energized and others did not. So I'll say a couple things. We had the 55,000 customers that we proactively de-energized. We had in excess of 194,000 additional customers who lost power by virtue of trees blowing into their lines. And so some outages may have been attributable to the proactive de-energization. There may have been outages that were attributable to the windstorm generally. Why specific feeders may or may not have been turned off would have to do with the modeling software that we applied. So I can't speak to your specific circumstance of why your power was not turned off and why others were. What I can tell you is that we employ modeling software that told us where the highest risk was, and that's where we attempted to de-risk the most. We also have, well, let me pause there. You seem not convinced by my
I'm totally not convinced because the people's power who is still on were on that wildland urban interface. That's where the
were on, or what feeder they were on. And
all across. Okay, so starting from South Boulder, all where the open space is. That power was all left on, and some of the highest winds are in Shanahan Ridge area, and the power there was on. And by high winds, it's often 100 miles an hour up there. So this was not the first time. So it isn't just. It was so odd. I know there's a lot of rustling in here. It was so odd for the community to see that people are finding it hard to believe that it was well thought through or that it was even thought through. It felt very random.
Well, I do appreciate that it felt that way, but I can assure you that it wasn't random. It was based upon the high winds, coupled with the atmospheric humidity, coupled with the ground humidity. I would like to look more into the specific circumstance that you're describing. I don't know if they had a combination of overhead and underground lines. I don't know what the fuel moisture is up there, so I would like to do more research because I can't speak intelligently to it specifically without knowing more about it. I will also tell you that separate and apart from public safety power shut off, the proactive.
Folks, if we could stay quiet, please, in the audience, and also try to avoid the moving around and blocking of people's sightlines and such.
Sit and I'll sit.
Okay, so if you can please not talk. Hey, everybody, please no speaking. If we could have quiet in the chambers.
He called me an idiot.
Quiet in the chambers, please.
And you're a settler.
Hey, all right, we need quiet. We're gonna have to clear chambers if we don't have quiet in the room. I'm asking for quiet. Quiet. If you would pick up where you were at left off.
Additional point that I wanted to make was that in addition to the proactive de-energization, again, this was the first time that we'd applied that mitigation here in Colorado. We've set our settings, so we do wildfire safety settings, which means we have reclosers on our power lines. I'll try to explain this I'm a lawyer, I'm not an engineer, but I'll try to explain this in a non-engineering way. We have what are called reclosers on our line, and so typically what a recloser does, if there is something that touches the line, it will cause the circuit will open and it will automatically reclose, and that will typically happen 3 times to re-energize the line so that you only experience a momentary outage. We have adjusted the settings on our lines so that they don't automatically reclose after that one touch. So it's called a one-shot setting or disabling of automatic reclosing. That's another setting that we apply doesn't require proactive de-energization, but it also helps mitigate wildfire risk. And it could be that we've applied those wildfire safety settings in, where we didn't do proactive de-energization.
I'm not sure what you said, but I'll move on. My next question is we knew that wind event was coming for days before. Nobody here that I knew that it took 2 to 3 days to turn the power back on. I don't know anybody that knew that, not the city, not the business owners. A lot of people lost a whole lot of money. So first of all, in the business community. And there are local businesses that cannot afford to shut down for 3 days during their big weekend in the spring. So I'm wondering if, first of all, you would consider helping the small businesses that suffered so much. Never mind COVID, this was like, you know, the next thing that they have to deal with right now. And then the other thing I have to ask is, did you really know that it would take 2 to 3 days for the power to go on? And if you did, why didn't we?
So I'll answer your last question first. How did we know how long it was going to take? I'll say this. We began our notifications Friday night. And again, this is not an excuse, but an explanation. It was the first time that we were applying this mitigation. We wanted to be thoughtful, we wanted to be deliberate, and we wanted to make sure that we were making the right decision. So we did spend a lot of time making sure that this was the right mitigation to apply. I mentioned already that we had disabled automatic reclosing. Based upon what we were seeing with all three of those criteria that I described, we made the decision that proactive de-energization was going to be necessary in this limited circumstance, in this limited part of our service territory. So we knew that we were going to do this Saturday morning. That's when we made the decision, the go, no-go decision. Friday night, we did notify customers that this was a possibility that we were contemplating. Saturday morning, we saw the wind conditions persisting, and we had more precise weather data, and that's when we made the decision that it was going to be a go, and so we notified all of our customers that we were actually going to do it. We did not know at that time how long it was going to take, and the reason we didn't know is because two things. You got 600 miles of line that you have to patrol. And we started pre-positioning crews to be ready so that once the wind event was concluded, we would be able to immediately begin the inspections and to begin the restoration. But it was difficult to be able to predict an estimated time of restoration because you don't know what you have to repair until you're out there walking the lines and seeing it. I will concede, council member, that we have an opportunity to have more accurate outage maps. We've heard that very loudly and clearly. Customers that what they were seeing was not matching up with what they were seeing on the website. So we do have an opportunity there. And an opportunity to be more frequent in our communications throughout the event, but it's very difficult to estimate a time of restoration until you actually see the damage that has occurred. And then, we do recognize that—
Robert, I'm going to just interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I've heard from the fire marshal that we need to have no one in the aisles blocking potential movement. So if you could either be in a seat or be up against the side walls, please, so that you're not blocking any potential movement of people who need to get in or out. That's from the fire marshal, fire chief. Thanks for complying with safety rules. Appreciate that. If you could continue, please.
So recognizing that, particularly given this is our first experience with applying this mitigation, that's part of the reason we've made the $50,000 donation to the food bank. We're not ruling anything else out, and we'll give some consideration to other ways in which we can help our communities.
I think okay. A lot of community members wanted to know why it was that those that had undergrounded lines were the ones they felt that had their power out the longest.
I don't know that to be the case, and so I can't really, I don't know how to answer that question and speculate about it. I can tell you that, about 40% of the lines in Boulder are underground, so that means 50% of them are not, 56% I think approximately. And it could be the case that some folks had underground power lines. This is not explicitly in your question, council member, but it's implicit. People that had underground power lines asking, why did my power go out? And it could be that they were on a circuit that was partially undergrounded and partially overhead, but without having specific service addresses, I can't really answer answer the question.
That's fair. And the next thing I want to ask, I think this is the final thing because I'm sure my colleagues have plenty of more questions, is where is that last question? Sorry, folks. So you said you would consider a compensation fund for businesses, is that correct?
No, I did not say that. I
Oh,
said
you
we
didn't.
consider other ways in which we might be able to help our customers in our community.
Did you know about our water treatment center, our water treatment issue, our water treatment plant,
I'm very familiar with it.
wastewater?
Talking to Mike Chard in real time the night of the event, and we're working very hard to make sure that we didn't cause a public safety incident. We were able to get the water treatment plant re-energized.
Right, but I'm just going to throw this out there that you should have known that that was going to happen as our utility. I feel you should have known. I mean, you were the ones that put those power lines in, did you not?
Yes.
Okay, so the question is why didn't you know? Why should the city have to be the one that has to tell you that we're about to have raw sewage go into Boulder Creek?
So I think there's two questions in there. I will say, again, we've conceded that we have opportunities to improve our communications, both with our customers and critical facilities. And, we're aware of our infrastructure and how our infrastructure operates. I'm not confident that I'm familiar with how the water treatment facility functions and operates. But once we were made aware of it, we worked very quickly to make sure that we didn't cause a public safety incident.
Do you mind if I follow up on that? Yeah, just thanks for that. And while we're just talking about the wastewater treatment plant, I'm hoping we can focus on, this is probably going to happen again. And so, what protocols for critical facilities, and particularly the one top of mind right now is that plant, can we apply differently to make sure, we're not in the same situation in the future?
So I think that's an excellent question, Mayor, and two things I'll say. You said you're certain this is going to happen again. Our goal is to make sure that this is as infrequent as possible. And so we have a whole host of mitigations that we intend to apply. System hardening and strengthening, which can include replacing bare conductor with covered conductor, looking at strengthening our poles by using different kinds of poles, undergrounding more where it makes sense. And so we have a whole host of mitigations that we want to apply. And we want to make sure that PSPS, Public Safety Power Shutoffs, when it does happen, that it happens infrequently, that we have better communications on the front, better and earlier communications, more frequent and accurate outage maps. And we want to make sure that we're putting in mitigations to help mitigate those ancillary risks that we discussed. So one of the things I think we have an opportunity to do is to make sure we have better communication protocols, particularly and specifically with critical infrastructure, and that is an opportunity that I suspect that you will see outlined in our next wildfire mitigation plan.
Thanks for that. I heard you talk primarily just now about communication, and I also was wanted to talk about how we could avoid having both of those substations cut off again in the future. Like, do you think that's something that we can avoid?
So here's what I'll say. I know that we've got you're talking about a very specific circumstance relative to this substation and the agreement that we made some years ago, and we put in 2 substations, and I think that redundancy was required. And I think there are other critical facilities that have redundancy as well, like hospitals, and I know DIA does as well. I think you have redundancy, and then you have belt and suspenders. So I would not necessarily rule out the notion of having backup generation in addition to being fed by 2 substations. And so I think that's a conversation we should have. I know that I'm understanding, and I've come to understand that there were certain expectations of the wastewater treatment facility based upon those 2 substations being fed. I would maybe think through whether and to what extent such a critical piece of infrastructure should have additional backup generation as well. And so I think that's a conversation to have, and I think we can have that conversation starting now.
I appreciate that. We're certainly investigating the options. I've got Tina up next.
Hi, thank you for coming and for joining us. I just had a couple questions that really follows on what you were just talking about around mitigation. And my hope is that we can obviously avoid shutdowns. And after this event, do you feel that you'll be increasing efforts for mitigation, whether it is having more undergrounding of wires or other efforts? Is this something that we'll see a lot more focus on, and we can start putting a timeline to where we get to something like 90% of our lines are resilient?
So I think the question is, well, let me just say yes. I don't want to say there's going to be more focus on it because we're very focused on it already. And as I was indicating, a significant 40 some odd percent of the power lines in Boulder are underground. We have an approved wildfire mitigation plan at the commission that we're operating against now. And so we are doing and taking efforts currently to harden our system and make it more resilient. So that effort will continue. I think what we will see in our next iteration of our wildfire mitigation, perhaps an acceleration of that. But I think that I don't want you to be left with the impression that we're not already focused on undergrounding, on system hardening and strengthening. And if there are other opportunities to do more of that more quickly, happy to have that conversation as well.
Thank you.
One thing to keep in mind that I do want to just note is that undergrounding is 3 times more expensive than putting in overhead lines, and so historically we've undergrounded for aesthetics, not for necessarily resiliency and wildfire mitigation, and so it's an evolving mechanism that we use to avoid and mitigate wildfire risk, but it's not free, and it's 3 times more expensive, and it depends on the topography and the geography of where you're doing it. It could be even more expensive than that, and so that's something to keep in mind as well.
All right, I've got Matt and then Taisha.
Appreciate that, Aaron. So I got a couple questions. Thematically, one kind of going how we got here, and a couple in terms of how we're going forward. The first one is, knowing you spent 7 years at PG&E, and I guess really my question is, after the Marshall Fire, I'm wondering how did we get to a place, or when were we thinking that PSPS would be implemented? We knew we were in a high wind environment. Marshall Fire was a lesson for all of us. And so I'm just sort of wondering, how come like a California PG&E model that they started in 2010, more or less, how are we not accelerating the implementation of that? And I think you certainly have firsthand knowledge of how that was implemented. And so that's really a question, is how was that not done over the last 2 years? And then certainly, is that what we can expect going forward? Is that we're going to see kind of that PG&E model where they're at phase 3 right now in implementation? Can we expect that? Because I think hearing the things of like, well, we're working on this, we're working on that, we're trying to improve communications, but I think the community wants, what does that look like? Because I look at the stuff that's happening with PG&E, and it's a very clear communication process. There's regular calls with critical infrastructure, sometimes weekly, and so those are things where those gaps aren't lost. And so I'm wondering, one, how is that not done up until this point? And 2, can we expect to go to that model, and how quickly?
So 2 things I'll say. I think PG&E's first PSPS was in 2018, not 2010. So
fair point.
But nonetheless, they've had a lot of experience doing it, and that's true. I think the goal there, as is the goal here, is to make that a tool of last resort. So I do think it's a tool that will remain in the toolbox. But I think your other question is, why aren't we further along? And I'll say this: I said that the risk in Colorado was not the same as the risk in California, and so that risk has evolved. And I'd say even the risk in Northern California was not the same as the risk in Southern California. I mean, the Diablo winds in Northern California are really what spurred the increased wildfire risk in Northern California. The Santa Ana winds in Southern California had persisted since 2007, and and San Diego Gas and Electric and SCE had a more advanced wildfire mitigation plan than did PG&E, because the circumstances dictated it. And so I would say that this is a tool of last resort. This was the first instance in which we had seen the risk being such that we needed to do it. I just want to be clear, our equipment didn't start the Marshall Fire, and I felt
Fair.
compelled.
I wasn't making that assumption just in terms of a community lesson and event that scared us all straight.
And then your last question is, can we expect to evolve to that model? I certainly want us to evolve to the model where we have earlier and more advanced notifications. I think 48 to 72 hours has become kind of the standard. Being able to make that shorter so that we can accelerate our estimated times of restoration, that is what we want to work toward. My primary goal is to make sure that we do this infrequently as possible. And I will tell you, we are in a hurry to correct and take advantage of the opportunities for improvement that we've identified from this last PSPS event. And you will see the learning from that show up in our next wildfire mitigation plan. And we're moving with all deliberate speed.
Appreciate that. And sort of my last question will be, you know, spring and sort of, fall into winter are kind of our bigger wind seasons. And so I think, the question is, what can we reasonably expect to have implemented or modified come the sort of next big wind event? Obviously, we're not expecting a massive change in a week or two, but like come fall, when our next big wind events show up and fuels are dry, a rollout of a robust communication plan, a municipal memorandum of understanding where we have those regular meetings, we know the players involved, we have proper polygons and mapping so that we know who, what, when, where, why. So I just kind of want to know what those expectations are so that, one, accountability is held there, but also so that we know what we're looking forward to and also can set up our own expectations about when the next event is and whether we're going to really be prepared. And again, if it's a tool of last resort, what do we expect for the next rollout for this tool?
So I think there are opportunities. So we're going to file an updated wildfire mitigation plan in the next couple of months, very soon. And that some of what you're describing will be outlined there. But I think there are things that we can start doing today. I think there are opportunities for us to reach out to some of the organizations. Let me back up a minute and say, we recognize that there are opportunities to learn from and partner with other organizations that are working with vulnerable customers in particular. And that's one of the areas that I definitely want to focus on immediately with urgency and in a hurry, is protecting those vulnerable customers that have critical medical equipment. And I think there's an opportunity. We don't have to wait on a wildfire mitigation plan to start partnering with those organizations. I learned listening to the CPUC comments last night that there's an organization that's supplying batteries to customers with durable medical equipment. There's an opportunity. We don't have to wait. We can work with those entities now. And so I think there's an opportunity for me to be here with you to demonstrate to you my commitment to transparency and openness and willingness to listen. I don't have to wait for a wildfire mitigation plan to do that. I think we are already talking with some of our offices of disaster and emergency management to put in place how we can communicate more appropriately throughout any kind of emergency preparedness event. I know we have 64 counties in the state of Colorado, and I want to understand how we can integrate ourselves into your emergency preparedness plans. And so my answer to your question may not be as specific as you like, because I'm hesitant to give specific timelines, but I can say that we will file an updated wildfire mitigation plan in the immediate future. And there are steps that we're going to be taking immediately to work with other organizations to help protect some of our critical customers. The $50,000 donation is also something we wanted to make sure that we did right away to demonstrate that we are taking this urgently and we are acting with urgency. And so those are some of the things that we're working on, Councilmember.
I appreciate that, and thanks for that response. And I appreciate you doing the donation for the $50,000. And I just will mention that, a lot of our businesses had a lot of loss, especially restaurants, lost product. And it didn't trigger their insurance because they lost maybe $20,000, but their insurance minimum was $50,000, and so they're hurting and already on slow margins. So I'd love for you guys to consider ways in which there's ways to maybe help compensate or lessen the pain of certainly our restaurant industry who took it on the chin for a couple days. So I know you can't make promises, but would love to see if you can sort of consider their impacts because they're pretty severe over those couple days. So appreciate that.
Good. I got Taisha and then Lauren. I got a quick one. Then maybe we can wrap up before too long. Okay, let's try to keep the questions quick because we still have a lot in the queue.
Oh, wait. Sorry. Thank you so much. I think I echo my colleagues. Can anybody hear me okay? I'm still getting used to this thing, and I feel like I can't hear myself. So. I can't hear myself. Okay, thank you. We know that over the last 5 years, there were 16 days on average between U.S. billion-dollar disasters compared to 82 days in 1980. And so although I appreciate comments or the expectation that, we want to limit how often this happens, I think the reality of where we are in the climate right now, we can anticipate that these kinds of things are going to continue to happen and potentially accelerate. And so I appreciate the the efforts that you're doing to both mitigate and adapt to our adapting climate. No one disputes the escalating climate events, and so really for me and our community, the main issue for me and what I've heard from community is the preparedness aspect of it, and of course the response. But I would love to hear a little bit more about some of the strategies you're working on regarding preparedness. You mentioned some of them with the intergovernmental collaboration, but just would love to hear a little bit more about your thinking and potentially how affected community, business leaders, and others are going to be engaged in that process to inform what that looks like, so it's not something that's done in isolation with Excel. I also just wanted to echo, or rather empathize with the recovery, recognizing that it does take days to recover those kinds of things to ensure that there's not additional harm like wildfires, as you mentioned. And at the same time was excited to hear that there is going to be improvements made in the technology, in the communications, et cetera. So I don't have any questions there. I do, again, thank you for the $50,000 to our food bank, but I would say that the response should be in proportion to the impact, and the impact was rather significant across our community. So I'm eager to see how, in addition to the $50,000 per my colleague Matt Benjamin and others, as we think about our business communities and others that were disproportionately impacted by this. And then again, wanted to make sure that there's a kind of a critical infrastructure analysis, something that has already been discussed. And I also very much appreciate the efforts around our individuals with medical needs that these kinds of incidents can be life-threatening for them. That's all I have. So actually I had one question around the preparedness, but in general, and most importantly, thank you for being here in person and being with us today. I think that it is very symbolic of the interest and desire to be more collaboratively more collaborative in the work that we do together. So I do want to thank you and your colleagues for showing up today. Thank you.
Thank you for the acknowledgement and the questions, and I will say that we haven't fully baked a plan of how we intend to be more collaborative with our first responders. Some of that's already happening. There's the Colorado Wildfire Resiliency Board that we participate in, and that has first responders and fire chiefs, and that was a creature of statute designed to define the wildland-urban interface and then define measures to mitigate wildfire ignition risk in the wildland-urban interface. And so we've been participating in that since the creation of that board. What we do expect to do is to work more closely with the emergency response agencies in particular, as well as making sure that our critical infrastructure list is as comprehensive as possible. We have a critical infrastructure list already. I think where we have an opportunity is to make sure that we have a greater and more particular understanding of the capabilities of that piece of critical infrastructure during an event, so we don't have another event like what happened with the treatment center. And so most of what we're hearing in terms of critiques of our performance is around communication with customers, with communities, and with critical infrastructure. And so that's where I think our focus is going to have to be to bolster that, and whether that is through the creation of advisory groups or through participation in the Wildfire Resiliency Board. We will continue to and seek your input on what that should look like.
I definitely appreciate that. Again, really want to emphasize though, because I'm not hearing that I'm hearing the preparedness groups, and that's really critical. But again, it's the users, the business community, and so we have Visit Boulder, we have the Business Chamber, we have Boulder Downtown Partners, and so my interest is not so much, or rather, in addition to those established boards, I'm also very eager to see stronger partnerships, communication, et cetera, with our existing community-led organizations. So thank you.
Lauren, and then Nicole, and then Ryan.
Thank you. I appreciate you being here this evening with us and the donations to Community Food Share, and I look forward to hearing more about the ways in which you help make our community members whole from this event. And I also hope this helps emphasize the need to work with the city to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And just continue to move those programs forward as fast as possible. In terms of the communication, one of my main questions is around mapping. So this is living in Boulder. This is the first time I've lived in a community that doesn't have a public electric utility. And it's also the first time I've lived in a community where the feeds aren't mapped or easily accessible, where they can tell you that the blue line is not, that they're turning that off, and you can know what that means. And I've seen in Excel's literature that this sort of lack of a publicly available map is said to be a security issue. I will say that in communities that I have lived in, that has been something that has been readily available, although redacted for security reasons. So is that something that you plan on having for our community?
Well, we definitely want to have, first, thanks for the question, and we definitely want to have more accurate outage maps. We heard during the event that what people were experiencing in real time didn't match up with what they were seeing on our outage maps. I will say, what we will or will not be showing, like substation locations and critical infrastructure, it's a genuine security risk. You don't want to put all your critical infrastructure on maps online for everybody to see. We are thinking through how we might be able to supply greater visibility into infrastructure without violating and adding security risk. I don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, we will work closely with the engineers and our security and our physical and cyber security department to determine what we can and can't provide. But I don't want to unreasonably set expectations that we're going to start putting a bunch of critical infrastructure online, because it is a security risk. And if there's an opportunity to learn from what other municipal utilities have shown, I'm glad to learn it. But our first priority is making sure that we don't create additional security, cyber or physical security risks.
Thank you.
Nicole?
Thank you for being here tonight and fielding so many of our questions. And thank you also just for recognizing some of the hurt that our community experienced and being the first of the communities in Colorado to experience one of these PSPSs. My question is just really around the engagement process for the wildfire mitigation plan that you'll be editing and submitting. And it's just to ask, can we get kind of an outline of your plan when you have it, for how you're going to be engaging communities, how you're going to be checking in with the disability community, hospitals, city managers and cities in our communities as well. I think this is something that we often get when our staff are working on a big project as a plan for engagement, so we can even just offer some feedback on the engagement and talking to people. So I think that's what I'm hearing most in the community is they want answers, but they also want to know how they can share their stories, how they can tell what went wrong, so that we can try to avoid that from happening again. So I'm curious if you have some thoughts on when you might have this type of engagement plan in place, and if there will be an opportunity for us to talk through it with you, or at least provide some feedback. I think at least our city manager in her office.
I think that's a reasonable request, and what I'm really hearing, I'll say two things. Our customers and our communities want an opportunity to share their frustration with us, and I fully recognize that. As I said, I wasn't able to listen to the CPUC comments in real time, but I'm committed to listening to all 3 hours of because it's available on YouTube, and I am committed to listening to that. I'm going to sit here tonight and listen to the citizens that want to share their feedback. More specific to your question, is there an opportunity to provide feedback on the plan before we file it? We typically do have an opportunity where we will work with stakeholders on major filings before we actually file it at the commission. I can't give you the specifics of what that's going to look like, but I will make sure that I talk with the team, and we'll figure out a way to have some type of stakeholder process before we make that filing. So I just said it out loud, so no. We're going to do it.
Your folks are taking notes right there.
Okay, I was too. So thank you for the question.
Okay. Ryan?
Thank you, Mr. Kenny and team, for being here. we clearly need this capability, and I appreciate you saying that you'd like to make it infrequent. It will, of course, continue to need to happen, and I would agree with Councilmember Adams that we need to be ready for scenarios that involve it happening more frequently than we expect now. And I heard you say that there's a plan in development, and so I have several questions, and I'm gonna state the questions, but they're not. I'm not gonna ask you to answer them now, but I hope that those working on the plan can consider the questions. So there's sort of 4 broad questions. The first is I would like an assessment of how Excel will come up to best practices. So as we've discussed, the 3 large investor IOUs, investor-owned utilities in California, have quite a bit of experience with this. I think I would like to see an assessment of good known practices like those from PG&E and others, and Excel's plan on each of those, whether to adopt them or not, with some kind of notes. So something like that would be the first thing. The second one is just there's a number of specific activity areas that I hope are in the plan. So there's a few here. One, what are the community partnerships that we need, that Excel needs to ensure to protect order, minimize loss and disruption, and safeguard vulnerable populations? You have talked about that. Another one is what can we expect as the procedures in the sequence when we know the shutdowns are going to start to happen? A run of show, starting with communications, but more broadly in the week or whatever coming up to it. Third, not just at the event itself, but the year-round. What is the year-round plan of work with the city, with the community, to make sure that plans are in place? Another one is reducing, what can we do to reduce the scope of the impacts of the event and improve the precision of the shutdown? My understanding is there is a learning curve with these things for utilities, and those like PG&E who have done it have reduced the scope and minimized impacts and improved precision over time. So that's another one. Another one is what is the level of investment that we can expect from the investors, not the ratepayers, but from the investors, to ensure that there's an orderly, cost-effective experience for ratepayers that avoids disproportionate impacts in a future regime where we're going to be probably having more of these. Again, my question this corresponds to what is a good practice, maybe from PG&E or others, but what is a level of investment that we can expect? And then the final one on that list of specific measures is, aside from these direct things that we're planning for, what will Excel do to demonstrate that it's being more proactive about managing known statistical issues? In one sense, we don't know much more now than we knew 2 weeks ago from a long-term statistical perspective. I think there's a case that Excel could have been more proactive. I don't want to dwell on that, but just to say would love to see some confidence, or be given some confidence that there's a plan to be proactive. So that was kind of a list of specific things I would love to see in a plan, and then there was just 2 more kind of general questions for the planners. One of those is, what do you need from us, from the city? Clearly, this is an all-hands-on-deck community exercise when we're doing shutdowns. It needs a lot of players, including the city. The city's here and ready, but we need Excel's direction to us to get things started. And then the final one is, what help do you need from us with respect to asking for permission from regulators, legislators, or whatever to be successful? What do you need from us to be successful? So those are my questions. They're not for now. You're welcome to respond, but I know we're over time a bit, so I'll just leave those and say thank you.
Councilmember, thank you for all 4 of the questions with the great subparts on number 2. I took notes, and I'm sure we've captured all of that. Assessment of best practices, I can say we've already started some of that. We've actually been out to PG&E to visit, and we're in contact with them. We've been physically out there to visit, and we're in contact with them relatively regularly. We will, and learning from other utilities through our trade association, EEI, and so that is underway, but we're not done. Assessment of good known practices and what we might adopt, that's infinitely reasonable. Your specific activities, I appreciate that. Some of that will be described in the plan that we file in our wildfire mitigation plan. The others about investment and year-round work plans, some of that is done in general rate cases, but there's opportunities I think we can share some of that as well. We do intend to reduce the scope and using sectionalizing devices will get us there. Some of that will be outlined in our wildfire mitigation plan as well. I think one thing that's implicit in the question that you're asking is that, and I've said this before, the PSPS is a tool, it's not the sole tool, and it's the last tool. And there are other tools like sectionalizing devices and the system hardening efforts, and so being able to share those plans with you, I think, is what I'm hearing in the question. I like the number 3, so give us time to think about what we need from you all. Right now, I'll just ask for a little grace and patience, which you're demonstrating, so thank you. And then what help do we need from you as we talk to the legislature and the CPUC? That's a great offer. I'm hearing an offer in there, and thank you for the offer, and I will reserve that for a time after this meeting, but thank you for that.
Okay, well, I'll wrap us up here. Between your remarks and my council colleagues' excellent questions, it got almost everything I wanted to ask about in, but just one last piece. Really appreciate your commitment to additional communications going forward. One thing I haven't heard yet is about multilingual communications. So I think this last time was only in English, and just wondering about certainly in Spanish, at a minimum, possibly other languages for future communications.
That's a no-brainer, and we should do that. Yes.
Great. Nice and quick and easy. I appreciate that. Yes, ma'am?
You also made me think about people with disabilities, and so I would imagine there would be a differentiated layer both from the cognitive and physical perspective, so would love to just add that as well. Sorry.
Thank you for it. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, well, and I'll just say, reiterate what my colleagues have said. Thanks so much for being here, for your responsiveness and willingness to listen, and heard a lot of openness to improving how this might happen again in the future, which I also really appreciate about those additional communications with us and with vulnerable residents as well, which is so important, people with medical devices and such. Really appreciate the donation for the community food share. That's a great measure to do, and I'll second my council colleagues in the request for some other business assistance for those who lost revenue or product as well. And then just say, I did give PUC testimony yesterday and listed a number of things that we're interested in for next steps. We'll send that to you in writing as well. But want to reiterate Ryan's point that we do stand ready to work with you on the next steps and would like to hear how we could assist to make sure that all of this works better in the future for our own residents and everybody else here in Colorado.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. All right. And with that, we will go to open comment. So, Elisha, if you could go over the public participation guidelines, please.
Yes, sir. Give me just a second. All right. Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am now going to go over our public participation guidelines at City Council meetings. Please note that the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, please visit our website at bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive-atmospheres. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. Our remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenities, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. In-person participants are asked to refrain from expressing support or disagreement verbally or with applause, with the exception of declarations. Traditionally, support is shown silently through American Sign Language applause or jazz hands. Thank you so very much for listening, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for that, Elisha. So each person will have 2 minutes to speak, and I will be enforcing that pretty rigorously so that it's fair to everyone involved. Everybody gets the same amount of time. Our first three speakers are Emily Zinn, Evan Buchman, and Aram Bingham.
The 150th anniversary is coming up, which, as the Centennial State, means that the nation's 250th is also. I'm here at the request of the America 250 Colorado 150 Commission, which I serve as the regional advisor representing Boulder and Broomfield counties. The commission has been appointed by Governor Polis to lead commemoration inclusive of all Coloradan stories. You may be wondering, shouldn't we all be concerned with today, not yesterday? So join me for a moment while we go back in time to 1973 and 74, the lead up to the Centennial Bicentennial. What were Americans thinking about 50 years ago? Well, democracy seemed on the brink of collapse with Watergate hearings, there were protests over Roe v. Wade, and there remained the backdrop of global tensions with Russia. I condensed that list, but it goes on, and I noticed some similarities to today. 1976 brought a huge enthusiasm for examining our shared history and coming together as Coloradans. Here in Boulder, Mayor Penfield Tate II led the Boulder Centennial Bicentennial Commission. At History Colorado, where the America 250 Colorado 150 Commission is housed, Penfield Tate III chairs the board of directors today. In my region, we are soon to have two of the only sister city relationships with our displaced treaty-granted tribes. The commission is hoping our Proclaiming Colorado's Black History exhibit will travel around the state. I invite you to join us in building relationships through our shared history and the opportunity to showcase hopeful stories across the nation. And I'd like to pass something around with your blessing.
Thank you. Our next speakers are Evan Buchman, Aram Bingham, and Lindsay Loberg.
My last name is Buckman, but thank you for trying.
Sorry about that.
Okay. Back in 2020, Boulder voters passed no eviction without representation. This measure allowed people facing eviction to have legal representation paid for by an excise tax of $75 per rental unit.
Hey, Evan, I apologize for interrupting you, but we've got a fire chief code issue again here. We've got somebody in the aisle. Person in the aisle, if you wouldn't mind moving.
They're up here with me. Is that okay?
The challenge is that all the people behind you now can't see as well, and so
the screen up there.
If folks would like to step off to the side, they can do that as well.
Up to you guys. Does that work?
It looks like you're not blocking.
Can you see the screen? Is the screen fine? Okay. Would it be fine if I restarted that?
Yeah, we'll let you restart.
That's where it was.
So I'm gonna keep it. Hey, everybody, if we can keep it quiet out there, I'm just gonna want to make sure that the aisles are clear. I'll leave it at that. So.
He just called me a bitch. This guy
He
right here.
did.
Hey, if we can have quiet from everyone.
Because I will respond to that.
Everybody.
He called me an idiot later, and the
Everybody needs to be quiet. Everybody needs to be quiet. Everyone needs to be quiet. All right, we're gonna call a recess if I don't get quiet here in the next couple of seconds. All right, quiet, thank you, appreciate that. Evan, if you would like to restart your remarks.
Okay. As I was saying, back in 2020, Boulder voters passed no eviction without representation. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with that in some way. The measure allowed people facing eviction to have legal representation paid for by an excise tax of $75 per rental unit. The revenue from this tax is designated for the administrative cost of representation, mediation, and funding for rental assistance and associated services for persons who are vulnerable to eviction in Boulder, friends, neighbors, and acquaintances of both me and you. In 2023, this excise tax raised almost $2 million. The measure also authorized the Boulder City Council to raise the annual excise tax rate in line with the inflation rates in the state. For 2021 to 2023, a consumer price index published by the state declared the cumulative inflation rate has been 13.6%. This would raise the fee to a little more than $86 and raise about $238,000 more for the community. In 2023, the program facilitated $365,000 to almost 200 unique clients, with the average receivable amount being approximately $2,100. With this $11 raise, the program could help 100 more unique clients. Please use your authority as the Boulder City Council to raise the fee to between $86 and $88 and help the people who voted for you. Additionally, I'm also here supporting a ceasefire in Palestine. As a Jew who grew up, goes to school, and had my bar mitzvah in Boulder just a few years ago, about 5 years ago, seeing Boulder City Council's inaction on this topic has really hurt me and many others in the Jewish community. We are disillusioned with Boulder City Council and the statements, and lack thereof, on Israeli war crimes in the name of Jewish people. Instead of being complicit in silence, as most of you have been, please make your voices heard, such as I am making mine, and pass a permanent, lasting ceasefire resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next three speakers are Aram Bingham, Lindsay Loberg, and Liz Collins. Do we have Aram?
All right. Before I begin, I just want to say I think it's rich that you all are happy to spend an hour on our loss of electricity for less than 24 hours here. And some of you seem to be annoyed that we continue to show up for 2 minutes to talk about Gaza, where folks have not had electricity for nearly 7 months. I live in Boulder. As we know, this Boulder City Council has made ceasefire resolutions in the past, as in the case of the Iraq War. What hasn't yet been said is that at the time this council took action in June of 2006, 3 years into the war, over 2,400 American service members and 600,000 Iraqis had been killed. Has this council not learned any lessons since? Now as then, we are being sold a pack of lies about the goals, conduct, and reasons for a war that we are paying for and that serves none of our interests. 600,000 is the approximate number of Palestinians in Gaza that are enduring catastrophic levels of deprivation and starvation, according to the UN. So I want to know if you really need all of them to be added to the body count before you will finally act. As Israel prepares to retaliate against the Iranian attack, which it provoked, attempting to prolong and expand this war, dragging the United States further into it, do you not see that this is where we are headed? Do you not see that our complicity in this genocide and your inaction in the face of it will come to haunt all of us? Do you not see that anything other than an immediate and permanent ceasefire makes all of us, Palestinians, Israelis, and Americans, less safe? We need you to send a message from the people of this city to our federal officials that they need to stop funding this genocide. Rather than condemning war crimes and collective punishment or stopping the transfer of arms, Joe Neguse and the rest of Congress have instead moved to condemn a phrase that calls for the uplifting and liberation of a people. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free calls for the dignity and humanity of Palestinians, for the end of occupation and the end of apartheid. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free does not call for the ethnic cleansing and oppression of Jews. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free does not call for the bombing of hospitals, schools, and children playing in the street. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free does not call for the massacre of hungry people trying to get flour from a truck. From the river to the sea, Palestine.
But thank you for your testimony. Our next three speakers are Lindsay Loberg, Liz Collins, and Paula Johansson.
This piece of art that I have here, I received it today in the mail. I have an art CSA. It's like the CSA you might get for your fruits and vegetables, but it's art. And this one, for people who cannot see it, it is a background of a cloudy sky, a light blue cloudy sky. There are blue birds. I know one of them is a sunbird. I don't know the others. and there's red text that says, Viva Palestina Libre, which of course is Free Palestine. I'm here in solidarity with Palestine today. And of course, to talk about the threat to our civil liberties and rights to practice solidarity. And of course, I'm talking about the ban of the phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in the house. And I'm here because it's in solidarity that the global community has long used that phrase. And it's so concerning, the redefining and the banning of it, because for me, it's so close to banning our right to practice solidarity with one another. And as many of you know, it's in solidarity that vulnerable people show up for one another, protect one another, make sure that one another's needs are met, especially when they're so vulnerable the government can or won't do that for them. And I wanted to talk about this piece of art because also today I went to an event where Palestinians living in occupied Palestine imagined what it might look like when Palestine is free. And they imagined freedom of movement. They imagined restoring their ancestral foodways that have been destroyed in ecocide, which is part of genocide. And I wanted to share those visions of freedom because it's what I hear when I hear that phrase and I think of being free and what those people think of being free. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Liz Collins, Paula Johansson, and Bettina Swicker.
Hi, thank you for hearing my statement. Every summer, hundreds of businesses increase Boulder's carbon footprint and global warming contribution by propping open the doors to entice shoppers inside. This practice is widespread and antithetical to the values of the city residents and the county's stated mission of mitigating global warming. Fortunately, it presents the city with an opportunity of low-hanging fruit in reducing its total emissions. In the early 2000s, New York City's utility, Con Edison, researched this practice and determined that an additional 2.5 tons of carbon were emitted per season for each business that ran their AC while propping a door open. For scale, 1 ton of carbon dioxide is 27 feet by 27 feet by 27 feet, the mass of 400 bricks, or 1 round-trip flight from Denver to Europe. Stores and restaurants typically do this during the hottest times of the year when energy utilization and brown or blackout risks are highest. Our local utility, Xcel, typically sources 25% of its energy from coal, but during peak usage times, this increases, resulting in more pollution. When I have asked business owners, managers, and employees to close their doors while running heating or cooling, they say that customers won't come in or that their manager requires it. As global warming is driving record high temperatures and low snow levels, forest fires, weather disasters, respiratory disease, and even migration, this is a time when the larger vision of government needs to intervene to protect resources and citizens. I ask that City Council seize this opportunity to reduce Boulder's total carbon footprint by enacting legislation that prevents this harmful practice and shut the damn door. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Paula Johansson, Bettina Swigger, and Jonathan Singer.
All right. Can you hear me?
Why don't you lower the mic down to you?
Can you hear me now?
That's good.
Basically, I just wanted to thank every single one of you. I'd like to thank you for coming in. But no matter what, I still am not going to understand why my business was shut down for 3 days. East End did not have any electricity. West End had electricity. For a small business like myself, 3 days of shutdown is disaster. I know everybody's trying to work on making sure that this doesn't happen again. The lack of communication, I didn't get one text, I didn't get one email. I had my neighbors coming in asking me if we were shutting down. My employees were back at work when we were told that we could open, and we did not get open. Comes Monday, It's like, are we gonna open or are we not gonna open? So I really appreciate everybody's doing their hard work and making sure that this doesn't happen again. But I want everybody to still remember a small business like myself, not just the restaurants or the hotels. I only have one store. I opened in 2019, hit COVID, and I'm still open. So I do not want a 3-day shutdown over electricity to be the reason that I lose my employees, lose my business. And I really do appreciate that, all the hard work, the city council and Excel, even though you can give me all the answers you can, I still am not going to understand why one side of town has electricity, the other one doesn't. But I do appreciate that, all the hard work, and I know that some people probably suffered more than what my business did, but that's not something that I can afford. And please keep the small business in mind when asking questions, when making demands, and not just, your hotels and your restaurants. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Bettina Swigger, Jonathan Singer, and Patrick O'Rourke.
Good evening. Bettina Swigger, CEO, Downtown Boulder Partnership and Downtown Resident. First, we want to just be clear that our business community is familiar with the devastation caused by wildfires, and we really appreciate Excel's attention to preventative measures. And we're committed to working in partnership with the city and our partner organizations and our utility to cultivate an environment which we are prepared for emergencies, and we support public safety measures. But like the people who spoke before me, I want to paint a picture of the chaotic environment in downtown Boulder that was caused by the short notice and unclear communication. Many members of our business community suffered economic hardship, and these impacts were significant not just for those who lost powers and had to scramble to call off staff and try to save product, but also for those who are not part of the planned outage but lost business and or unnecessarily took emergency actions because they thought they would lose power and then they didn't. So in case you weren't downtown that weekend, here's what things looked like. The east end of Pearl Street was without power. The west end was energized. One side of the mall was dark and the other was not. So the shutoffs appeared arbitrary. You've heard that already before. On Saturday night, with traffic lights out and street lights out, downtown felt desolate and eerie. It was definitely a security risk, and we're really grateful that there were no major public safety issues. Now, we leapt into action, and we partnered with the chamber and our other business leaders, and we opened a survey, which to date has gathered more than 96 responses. So some headlines from that survey: businesses reported an estimated $1.3 million in lost revenue, an estimated $250,000 in unpaid wages, and an estimated $125,000 in inventory and product losses. So we ask City Council and our staff and city staff to work with us and our coalition to work with us to take action. And some ideas include things like establishing an emergency protocol response so that we can notify businesses in a timely manner of planned outages and unplanned outages, exploring establishing a small business impact fund, and to learn from cities and other states that have experienced these planned outages. We look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Jonathan Singer, Patrick O'Rourke, and Evan Ravitz.
Thank you, Mayor, members of City Council, and staff. I'm Jonathan Singer, the Senior Director of Policy Programs with the Boulder Chamber of Commerce. I want to first of all thank not just City Council and Excel Energy for being here, but I also want to recognize the hurt and distress felt not only by residents, but also businesses of all sizes during the shutdown. And I want to express deep thanks to our emergency service workers and frontline workers that worked to restore energy as quickly as they possibly could. That said, we're working closely with Downtown Boulder Partnership and others to ensure that in the short term, medium term, and long term that we can take the right steps to ensure that these kinds of shutdowns in the future, as climate-related disasters continue to occur, don't exacerbate the same level of distress that we've seen before. What does that mean? One, I want to point out that even at your own City Council retreat, you pointed out economic development as one of your top priorities. Let's use that opportunity to talk about emergency response and disaster resilience for our businesses of all sizes. Yesterday, I want to thank Mayor Brockett for being there at the PUC as well as other business members. We were also there, and we encourage folks to respond to that PUC survey so we can get the best data possible to provide the best response in that medium and long term. We look forward to the Resilience Group relaunch that we are working together with businesses. And as we think about our Climate Action Plan tax, our CAP tax is paid disproportionately more by businesses than it is homeowners. Now, that's not to say we take from one to the other, but let's leverage that to work with our businesses to talk about what we can do to create things like a small business disaster assistance fund. Businesses weren't just unable to, but they were afraid to utilize their insurance. Let's find ways within our own resources to make those solutions happen.
Thank you. Now we have Patrick O'Rourke, Evan Ravitz, and Joseph Stein.
Thank you, Mayor Brackett. My name is Patrick O'Rourke. I'm not speaking on behalf of Historic Boulder, but as a private citizen. Last week, before this board, we brought Civic Historic District application to you. We thought we were going to be hearing or presenting in a quasi-judicial hearing, but what broke out is a legislation hearing. Several city council members brought their personal bias to the hearing, and even to the point where at one point during the deliberations, Ryan Schuhard brought up during that conversation 5 topics that were not on the agenda. And if you read the items there, transportation was not part of it. Canyon Road was not part of it. As a matter of fact, one of the comments you said at the end is, let's give the historic or the Civic District Alley Road. I don't know where that came from, and I thought that was inappropriate. The second part of the observation I had was that 3 days before the hearing, I was notified that this proposal was not going to pass. It was predetermined. That was unfortunate. And I can't explain how we heard that, but we did. But I kind of question that when you have a hearing and that the first city council person speaks with a pre-written 30 or 40 paragraph or sentence comments, which was Councilman Falkers, that you had already made up your mind before the hearing. So unfortunately, I just felt that that was an unfair hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Evan Ravitz, Joseph Stein, and Khalid Alali.
Dante in the Inferno said, "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in a time of moral crisis." My mom, my Jewish mom, her sisters, and their mom fled Nazi Germany in 1932 to London, then a farm during the bombing, then Toronto, and then Mexico City, before finally allowed into the U.S. in 1940. Israel and its pet American politicians have turned never again into again and again and again, now risking nuclear and/or world war. Everyone should see the documentary The Gatekeepers, which interviews all 6 former directors of the Israeli FBI called Shin Bet, the world experts on fighting terrorism. They all say Israel is causing terrorism. The Gatekeepers is free at the website Documentary Area. Our representative, Joe Neguse, is the son of refugees from colonial Eritrea, yet votes repeatedly to fund Israel making millions more refugees. He and his predecessor, Jared Polis, are tools of AIPAC, Joe's biggest contributor this year, giving him $33,400. Joe's Facebook post says, "I've often wondered how different my life would have been had my parents been unable to immigrate to the U.S. Joe asked the 2 million dying Palestinians who can't leave Gaza, This is the first time the U.S. has been on trial for genocide.
Your time is up, but
It's
thank you
our
for your
job
testimony.
to make it the last.
Time is up. All right, next we have, and please quiet in the audience. Next we have Joseph Stein, Khaled Alali, and David Cooper.
Hi, can you all hear me? Great. Thank you for having us. My name is Joseph Stein. I live in South Boulder. I've lived there almost all of my life. I would be remiss, of course, if I did not call on you all once again to do all that you can to put as much pressure on possible and all of our elected officials for an immediate and lasting ceasefire and arms embargo against Israel. But I'm actually not here to speak about that. I'm here to talk about the newer excise tax. And to make two related requests of City Council. First, I'm asking that City Council raise the rental license excise tax to $86 a year to keep up with inflation, as allowed by newer. And second, that future increases to the excise tax concordant with inflation be included in the city's financial planning work and assessment of fees. I bring these requests for two related reasons. First, Newer has been remarkably successful at keeping people in stable housing since it was passed in 2020. But second, despite Newer's successes, there is still an extreme need for housing assistance in Boulder. In 2023, the excise tax raised $1.75 million, of which $365,000 went to rental assistance. Assuming that the revenue would otherwise remain constant, raising the tax by $11, tracking inflation, could raise an additional $238,000, potentially helping hundreds of Boulderites remain housed through the rental assistance fund. Despite these successes, the needs in Boulder remain dire. As of last summer, homelessness is increasing in Boulder County, and BVSD reported a record number of homeless students. The cost of housing continues to rise, which we know is correlated and likely causative of homelessness and eviction both. I do not think that raising the excise tax is going to be some kind of silver bullet, but it is a common sense first step that I hope Council will pursue. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Khaled Alali, David Cooper, and Laura Gonzalez.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, my name is Khaled Alali. I had a speech ready, but I have to first address the white supremacist and capitalistic privilege for you all to take 1 hour to address not having electricity for 24 hours when Gaza has not had any for the last 6 to 7 months, and intermittent electricity for decades controlled by the Zionist regime. I am here to help pass a ceasefire resolution for Palestine, but it's sad that despite many attempts, this council has failed us to pass a resolution, which is the bare minimum we ask. And the city of Gaza was wiped because of silent council members like you. So thanks for your so-called support for this cause. Also, yesterday, the USA House of Representatives passed a resolution that whoever says, open quote, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, end quote, are considered anti-Semitic. And let me explain what from the river to the sea means. From the river of Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free means giving Palestinians the right to return to their lands that were stolen from them, the right for the indigenous people to exist. Not elimination of the Israel as they are claiming. We appreciate the ceasefire resolution to be passed for the sake of humanity. Lastly, yesterday, April 17th, is a national day for Palestinian prisoners. Over 10,000 prisoners, most of them without charges, and hundreds have lost their lives from torture from the Zionist regime. I would like to take a moment of silence for all those prisoners who are mistreated under international law. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last two in-person speakers are David Cooper and Laura Gonzalez. Then we'll go to the virtual ones.
Hello, my name is David Cooper. I live at 2680 Lafayette Drive. I've lived there for more than 30 years. And for most of the time, we've had a really small neighborhood trail at the end of Lafayette where it meets Lehigh Street. However, over the last couple of years, this little neighborhood trail has turned into a regional destination trailhead with people coming from Denver and Longmont and just the whole region of northern Colorado. Our neighborhood has discussed with quite a few city people the use of this trail for 3 or 4 years. 3 years ago, I asked the city open space to put a trail canter on there so we could actually get some data on trail use so we can have an objective discussion. So just for the record, in 2023, last year, there were 98,048 users on this trail. Those are one-way users. They go both ways. Doesn't include small children or dogs, which is a lot of extra people. So far in 2024, we've had over 25,000 users on this trail. Last weekend alone, there were 1,200 users on this trail. That's in one weekend. It's the same level of use as we're seeing on Mount Sanitas, and every weekday is just crowded with cars. So the problem is not the use. We all love open space. We love using open space, glad to have everybody enjoying it. The problem is almost all these people come in cars. Days with 600 users, we're facing probably 250 to 400 cars trying to park on Lehigh and Lafayette Street. And I mean, really, where do we put these cars? We have no place to put them on our little neighborhood. There's constant traffic. There's a lot of U-turns certainly in my driveway. The congestion is just too much for our neighborhood, and it was really never designed for this kind of use. And we were really just overburdened accommodating trail users who are coming from all over the region. As you know, there's lots of trails in South Boulder. There's Mesa Trail, Dowdy Draw, Marshall Mesa, Bobolink. All of them have parking lots. Okay, they all accommodate users off highways and roads. And all I'm asking is that we get the same treatment of some sort of off-street parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Gonzalez is our last in-person speaker.
Hello, good afternoon. I am here to speak on behalf of only myself as a descendant and survivor of one of many settler colonial genocidal projects, which is now the USA. My demands are: 1, pass an immediate and permanent ceasefire resolution; 2, defund our 1.6 million city tax dollars to Israel; and number 3, assure that our freedom of speech is protected in our city. I am here today to share some history and true meaning of the phrase "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," due to the recent suppressive and fascist resolution that was passed in the House conflating this liberatory phrase to anti-Semitism. Let me say it loud and clear. This phrase does not intend to say that Israelis must be eliminated. We indigenous people value life and Mother Earth. Why do you think we haven't taken arms against settlers here? Because we value life, coexistence, and the land. We know the land is not property and can hold all of us. I'm urging you to pass legislation and resolutions aligned with these values to benefit all of us, and not just those who are proximal to whiteness, either by skin color or mindset. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, intends to show our desire for Palestinian liberation and dignity from the 76-year illegal occupation, land theft, apartheid, and Palestinian ethnic cleansing by the Zionist settler colonial project. This phrase shares the vision for all Palestinians to have equal rights in Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which includes the right to return for all the Palestinian diaspora. It is concerning how Israelis continue to victimize themselves and say this phrase is anti-Semitic when the Likud's original party manifesto in 1977 stated that between the sea and the Jordan there will only be Israeli sovereignty. It also argued that the establishment of a Palestinian state jeopardizes the security of the Jewish population and endangers the existence of the state of Israel, thus denying the existence and human dignity of Palestinians living in their indigenous lands. Stating that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is anti-Semitic is not just wrong because we love our Jewish siblings. It's discriminatory because it privileges the feelings of one group over others. It also demonizes and silences pro-Palestinian voices in the U.S. I would say it loud, proud, and clear. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Desde el río hasta el mar, Palestina será libre.
All right, let's avoid the clapping, please, folks. That's it for our in-person. We have 6 remote testifiers. The first 3 are Bharat Tata, David Gustafson, and Sven Steinmo.
Hi there, this is Bharat. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the newer ballot initiative in 2020 was passed by a margin of around 20 points and created the Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Services Program. Evictions destroy communities. It's time that we adjust the excise tax that funds EPRAs to catch up with the times. A 13.6% increase to match with inflation will allow the program to accomplish more critical work in preventing evictions. This would raise an additional $238,000 for the program. Our rents have consistently increased by double digits, and landlords who make thousands of dollars each month off a single unit can definitely afford the $11 increase per unit. Let's make this excise tax inflation adjustment automatic every year so we don't have to continually revisit this issue. The voters made our position clear when we voted for newer with a strong mandate. Council should ensure the program continues as intended. We can't pretend to care about the crisis of homelessness, about public health, about children's health, about diversity in Boulder, if we allow our eviction prevention program to stay underfunded for our most vulnerable neighbors to continue to face housing insecurity. We can't pretend to care about housing insecurity if we don't speak out for Palestinians. Gaza is mainly composed of people who were ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948. They can often see their stolen homes from the militarized fence that separates them from the snipers and drones that guard their exit. And speaking of housing insecurity, 70% of homes in Gaza have now been destroyed in just a few months, thanks to our own taxpayer dollars. Ceasefire in Palestine now. Council, don't make excuses. Let's do something and pass a ceasefire resolution. It's the very first step to any kind of lasting peace. Thanks.
Thank you. Just make sure if we can have quiet in the audience, please. Next, we have David Gustafsson, Sven Steinmo, and Flanders Lorton.
Hello, my name is David Gustafson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I live a block away from David Cooper and also from Sven Steinmo. I want to echo Mr. Cooper's comments. There's a massive influx of people into the neighborhood by the trailhead. It's no longer just Saturdays and Sundays, it's every day. It's making the neighborhood dangerous. You've got a lot of cars going on Lehigh and Cragmore and Lafayette. You've got people wandering around the streets, loading and unloading things for their trailhead use. The city needs to build a parking lot further to the south somewhere where there's a lot of open space. As it is now, the neighborhood is being destroyed. So I echo his comments, and I also wanted to say that the city needs to get serious about banning all gasoline-powered landscaping equipment. The environmental health, safety, and other problems associated with gasoline-powered landscaping equipment have been well documented for years and years and years. Many towns have already gone to ban the use of such equipment, and I'm not talking about an ineffective de minimis ban on government-owned gas-powered equipment. The landscaping companies are harming their own low-paid workers, yet they're arguing that they can't switch. Well, but they're happy to expose their workers to all of the health consequences that use of such equipment entails. There's no point whatsoever.
Your time is up, but thank you for your testimony. Next, we have Sven Steinmo, Flanders Lorton, and Miriam de Santiago.
I do not see Sven online. If you are here, please let me know by using the raise hand function or reaching out to me in the Q&A box.
All right, we'll then go to Flanders Lorton.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to talk to you today, as many others have, about urging you to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. As city officials, you might think that you don't have any influence over international politics, but that is not true. As we saw during today, the protests at Columbia University in New York, where over 100 people were arrested for peacefully protesting in a lawn that was declared as a free speech zone. We see fascism increasing in this country. We see police militarism increasing in this country. And that protest came after 30 years after the previous protest on that same lawn in Columbia, which was protesting against segregation on campus. The people fighting for a free Palestine, you see, it's an echo of the same movement of the people who were fighting for women's rights to vote, African-American rights in this country, and end to segregation. This is the second civil rights movement in this country. I see you rolling your eyes, but it's the truth. And yeah, that's right. Let me read you a quote from the Israeli army. We were not interested in killing Hamas operatives only when they were in a military building or engaged in military activity. On the contrary, the IDF bombed them in their homes without hesitation as a first option. It is much easier to bomb a family's home. This system is built to look for them in these situations. This is in reference to a new AI system that the Israeli military has used to intentionally target civilians. Targets were marked within 20 seconds with barely any human intervention, and then were bombed at 5 in the morning every single day for the past 6 months. This is the reason that so many residences have been destroyed, 70% of them. Last week, we had the Israeli military bomb a playground, killing 11 children. Yeah, we also had the Israeli military using drones that were playing sounds of women crying and calling for help so that when people went out of their houses to help them, shot them. Last week, the Al-Shifa massacre, which killed over 1,500 or killed and injured over 1,500 Palestinians, was the worst Palestinian massacre, one of the worst in history, and yet no Western media coverage. Ceasefire now, free Palestine.
Thank you. Quiet in the audience, please. All right, our last two speakers are Miriam de Santiago and Eva Wheelock. Miriam will be speaking in Spanish with a translation afterwards, and as an accommodation for that translation need, we'll have some additional time. Miriam?
Hola, mi nombre es Miriam de Santiago. Soy conectora de emergencia para la ciudad de Boulder y también tengo más de 4 años como organizadora de comunidades. Y esta es la razón por la que estoy representando a comunidad. Muchas gracias por estar aquí y escuchar lo que la comunidad tiene que decir. Yo vivo al norte de Boulder en una comunidad de casas móviles. La preocupación que nuestra comunidad tiene es que si cada que haya estos vientos o mal clima, harán estos cortes de energía. ¿Y cómo serán controlados estos cortes de energía? Ya que se avisó con poco tiempo o no se avisó. Y no estábamos preparados para estar más de 28 horas sin electricidad. La mayoría de nuestras viviendas funcionan solo con electricidad. Tampoco los avisos fueron tan eficientes como lo habían dicho. Habían dicho que serían cortes por ciertas horas y luego volvería, y no fue así. En estas viviendas la mayoría de la gente es de clase trabajadora. Muchos de ellos no pudieron salvar sus despensas del refrigerador o los medicamentos que son de vital importancia para la gente enferma. Nosotros, la comunidad, quisiéramos saber cuál será el protocolo que se usará de ahora en adelante para cuando estos apagones sean establecidos por las condiciones climáticas. ¿Cuáles serán los protocolos que garanticen que estos apagones serán para beneficio y resguardo de las comunidades más vulnerables? ¿Cuáles serán las medidas preventivas para resarcir los daños materiales perdidos durante los apagones? ¿Cuándo será cuáles serán estos protocolos? Aquí estoy disponible por si necesitan más historias de la gente afectada y muchas gracias. Y por cierto, no creo que el dinero que ellos estén donando será suficiente. Tan solo en mi casa perdimos $700 en comida del refrigerador. Entonces, un poquito más de empatía estoy pidiendo para nuestras familias vulnerables.
And this is the Spanish interpreter, failure certified Spanish interpreter. Hello, my name is Miriam de Santiago. I am an emergency response connector for the city of Boulder and also have been working as a community organizer for over 4 years. And that is the reason that I am here representing the community. Thank you very much for being here and for listening to what the community has to say. I live in North Boulder in a mobile home community. The concern that our community has is if every time there is wind or bad weather, there will be these energy shutdowns, how will these outages be controlled since there was very little time for the notification or they did not notify us at all, and we were not prepared to be without electricity for 28 hours. The majority of our homes run only on electricity. Also, the warnings were not as efficient as they had said. They had said that there would be outages for certain hours and then it would return, and that was not what happened. The majority of the people who live in these homes are working class. They were not able to salvage the food in their refrigerators or the medications that are of vital importance for people with illnesses. We, the community, would like to know what protocols will be used from now on for when these outages will be established due to climate conditions. What will be the protocols that will guarantee that these outages will be for the benefit and safeguarding of the most vulnerable communities? What will be the preventive measures used to compensate for the material losses and damages during the outages? When will these protocols come into play? I am available here in case you would like more stories from the people affected by this. Thank you. And of course, thank you for the money, but it just isn't enough to pay for the damages caused. Just from my own home, there was $700 lost from our refrigerator, and so we are asking for more empathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you and gracias. All right, our final person tonight is Ava Wheelock.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I am speaking, my name's Eva, and I am speaking about the medical vulnerability that I experienced during the power shutoff. I take care of my mother, and my mother is on hospice care. And we did not receive any warnings or anything. I started hearing about it on Facebook and the Nextdoor app. We were surrounded by communities, Keewaydin and Martin Acres. They started shutting down. Our neighborhood never shut down, Fraser Meadows, but everybody around us shut down for almost 30 hours. Martin Acres, I believe, was about 30 hours. So, of course, we are always aware of an emergency, so I immediately began to figure out how we were going to shelter in place if we lost power. I had to make sure we had ice and batteries and things like that. But really, if we had to evacuate, how do you evacuate a dying person? Can you guys answer that? I don't know how to evacuate my mother. And I was terrified. And I just want you to know that you guys need to have a protocol or a procedure to set up so that I can call the hospice people and say, hey, how are we going to take care of my mother? On the Monday, the hospice workers were stressed out because they were trying to replace oxygen. They were trying to get medications that were refrigerated. And this is just so unacceptable. I just can't believe that there wasn't any prior warning. Thank goodness my mom is still here. But this was very, very stressful, and I do not think that it is fair to let our vulnerable people suffer and be afraid. And there's many people with medical vulnerabilities, as you know, and I just wish you guys would get a protocol together quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that was our last speaker, so I'll close the open comment portion and turn to city staff for any responses.
Yes, thank you, and just appreciation to everyone who spoke tonight. I did want to respond to one item that came up from several folks related to the eviction prevention, which is the rental license excise tax. Staff and the tenant advisory committee, which is the advisory committee for that program. I know they've been talking about that issue. If council's interested, we're happy to bring some follow-up information to you.
I imagine that would be valuable. Thanks for that, Chris. Erin, did you have anything?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Any council members have any follow-up? Yep, Lauren?
Thank you. I took a list, so I'm sorry. Usually I'm not very responsive, but I wanted to thank Lindsay Loberg for sharing that wonderful piece of art. Lisa Collins, with the energy code requirements for when doors or windows are open, we do require a shutoff for new buildings, but I see Jonathan in the audience. Hopefully we can look at some things around existing buildings related to that. For Patrick O'Rourke's comments about me having pre-written comments, I do often pre-write notes, but that does not limit. I always listen to public comment and evaluate based on what is heard during a presentation and from the public. And then finally, Miriam and Eva, I wanted to thank you for bringing forward those concerns from the community and your lived experiences. It's much appreciated.
I got Tara.
There was a business community member back there. Are you still there? I think that's her. Yes. What business were you? That's right. So I went to visit her during the Taste of Pearl, and thank you so much for coming down and speaking to us. It was very meaningful, and I'm sure that Excel was interested in your story because that's a lot of our small businesses had the same story as she did. So thank you.
Great. Anything else? I got Ryan.
Thanks. I also wanted to acknowledge Patrick O'Rourke and thank you for the feedback. And just to assure you that my intent certainly was on the landmarking decision to be quasi-judicial. I made comments additionally. So in any case, just please be assured that my intent was quasi-judicial, and that's what I did. So thanks for the feedback. I'll appreciate it.
Taisha.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to all those who spoke. Thank you for our community members who continue to voice their interest and support for a ceasefire. Again, we don't have the nods to have that conversation, but just know that your voices are heard. They do matter, and historically they have mattered and continue to do so. So thank you so much. I also wanted to just lift off this energy thing. So I'm happy to know that we've got something, but again, you know, it really is, to me, goes back to that 7th generation principle, which is to say, are we making decisions now that will allow for 7 generations? And the current policy apparently that we have is a policy that sounds like it's for maybe one or 2 generations of insured. So I would love to revisit and see what our authorities are and how we can better incentivize and support our businesses. And then I also wanted to lift up, I just came back from the Partners in the Outdoors Conference, which is sponsored by the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and there was significant conversations around the increased use of our public lands. And not only is it impacting the communities that are around those trailheads, but it is also impacting our wildlife and all of our natural resources. And so thank you so much for continuing to raise these issues. I'm very supportive of the park-to-park transportation systems and other mechanisms to not only decrease our carbon footprint and cars, but also, again, just to be very mindful that we are all sharing on this stolen land that we get to privilege to call home. And it is our responsibility to identify pathways that are not only good for residents versus those who may be coming from different neighborhoods and communities. Let us also remember that we've had very exclusionary housing policies as a community since its founding of the first settlement in 1851. So it is absolutely critical that we remember that some of these exclusionary policies have resulted in people living in Longmont and other places when they used to live here. And so my philosophy is always finding pathways that we can share, and I'm eager to continue to work with our incredible city staff, volunteers, and others who are working on this issue. So thank you so much for all of your comments. They are heard and valued. Thank you again also, Bettina, for that incredible survey and the information and results from that survey. Again, I'm assuming that has been sent to Excel as well, and eager. And again, just thank you for all of the community members, organizations that are working so hard to make sure that the city of Boulder is a place where everybody is seen, valued, and heard. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just call on myself and thank folks for coming out and testifying tonight. I wanted to thank people for their stories about the power outage and how that affected them. Bettina, Downtown Boulder Partnership, I know you all sprung into action, really helped the downtown businesses. Thank you for that. Jonathan from I know the Chamber also really stepped up in that way. I appreciate that. And really appreciated hearing some of the heartfelt testimony from vulnerable populations, Ava with your mother, and Miriam about the mobile home parks, and gracias por su testimonio. So thanks everybody, and with that, I think I'm not seeing any other hands, so we will close that out for open comments. And sorry, we're done with open comment. Okay, we're moving on to our consent agenda now. If we could please, Elisha.
Thank you, sir.
Tonight's consent agenda is item number 3, and it consists of items 3A through 3H.
Do you have any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Nope. No, we need quiet. We need quiet. All right, I'm gonna recess the meeting. Let's step out. All right, we're going to come out of recess here. And if we can come back to we were just considering the consent agenda. And Tara's got crumbs. So any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, perhaps someone might be interested in a motion. Yeah, Taisha?
Oh, sorry. Wait, Kristen, is this the time? Okay. Sorry, I just wanted to speak. And Councilmember Tina, I wasn't sure if you were planning on saying anything about the library district appointees, and just, so if you already have something prepared, I certainly don't want to steal the thunder. I just wanted to make sure. We had talked about it, but we didn't coordinate, so I just wanted to open the floor.
Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and talk about some of our thoughts with the appointments?
No, absolutely. Happy to, and feel free to chime in. So both Tina and I had the opportunity to join County Commissioners Loachman and Levy, in addition to representatives from the current Library District Board, to review applications, to have rigorous discussions, and have identified or recommended two very strong candidates. You know, lots of experience in community engagement, which we know will be absolutely critical in this next stage of the library district work, in addition to the information technology expertise that Andy has already been offering as a volunteer, and now will be, hopefully with the approval of this council and the board and the county, to be able to serve in the board role. And so we are very excited about the two candidates that we are recommending. We will also, something else came up in the review process, and that is the applications lean significantly for City of Boulder residents. And so as we know, this library district is much bigger than the City of Boulder. And so the board is aware of that and working on recruitment efforts. But I think it is something that, you know, we all need to more support and consideration on. And actually, Tina, you had a really great recommendation that in the interim, because we do not have that representation on the library district board right now, that there be alternative mechanisms, whether it be through an advisory council or something else, that would allow those community members that are not currently represented geographically on the library district to still be engaged and active participants and involved in ideation, implementation, and evaluation. Did I miss anything else, Tina? All right, thank you.
Thanks for that, Taisha, and thanks to you and Tina for your service on that committee. It's an important role, and I'm excited to be appointing Andy Saylor and Tom Cosgrove to the commission this evening. And with that, perhaps a motion?
So moved.
Okay, the consent agenda has been moved with a second. Roll call, please, Elisha.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. We'll start the roll call for the consent agenda items 3A through 3H with you, Mayor Brockett.
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Yes.
Marquis.
Yes.
Shuhart.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Spear.
Yes.
Councilmember Weiner.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
And Benjamin.
Yes.
The consent agenda is hereby approved unanimously with a vote of 8-0.
Thank you for that. If we can go to the call-up check-in, please. Oh, and actually, I'll just want to acknowledge we've got some amazing housing folks who work on housing our community present. Thanks for all the phenomenal work EFA and our city departments are doing on providing affordable housing to the community. And with that, if we could go to our call-up check-in.
All right, sir. Thank you. Our call-up check-ins are item number 4 on tonight's agenda. 4A is the call-up consideration of a site review to redevelop 1501 and 1509 Arapahoe Avenue with 8 attached residential dwelling units with underground parking and 2 at-grade parking spaces behind the building. The development is proposed to be 3 stories in height that will not exceed the by right height limit of 38 feet. This is reviewed under case number LUR 2023-00002.
Any interest in calling this item up? Not seeing any, so I don't think we're going to call this one up. So if we can go to our next matter from the city manager, please.
Yes, sir. Our next item on tonight's agenda is item number 6, matters from the city manager. 6A is the Boulder Social Streets update and next step recommendations.
All right, we're going to go ahead and kick this item off, and we've got some staff coming up. We also have some consultants that will be online as well, and I'm going to toss it over to Mark Wolf to introduce this.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, Council. I'm Mark Wolf, Assistant City Manager. Really excited to introduce the Boulder Social Streets item for this evening. I thought it would be helpful to provide a little context and insight before handing it off to our project consultants from GAL. Our efforts to rethink the use of public right-of-ways and activate all public spaces are embedded in and across many departments and activities throughout the organization, from special events to parks and open space to outdoor dining. This work took sharp focus during the early stages of the pandemic, especially as it related to safe gathering in public streets. While much of the early discussion focused on West Pearl, the city leaned into reimagining the use of public right-of-ways, city assets, parks and open space for community gathering. After working with Council's process subcommittee on downtown streets for public spaces to help guide additional engagement with businesses and community in 2022, the focus turned towards experimenting with 13th Street between Canyon and Arapahoe in 2023 with a rebrand as Boulder Social Streets. We acknowledge that there is community desire to leverage more of our public assets in this way and to attract even more diverse audiences through inclusive community-led events. Tonight you will hear a report out of those 2023 activities, including some compelling recommendations from our project consultants. We learned a lot through our experiments, and this year represents an opportunity to review and improve our internal processes and continue our partnership with community to build a better program across the entire city. In operating in a limited resource environment, I didn't say constrained, the vision you will hear tonight is an ideal state. However, we believe 2024 represents a meaningful opportunity to take some of these recommendations to heart, to get out of the way as the city, to make it easier for community to use public spaces in different and exciting ways. I want to thank the project team, some of which you'll hear from tonight, including communications and engagement, transportation and mobility, planning and development services, and community vitality, and especially our consultants from GAL for the work in getting us to this point. You'll hear from from Natalie Stifler, our Director of Transportation and Mobility, in a bit on next steps, but first, I am happy to hand it over to Brett Merriam, Project Manager from GAL, who is joining us tonight virtually. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yes, so my name is Brett Merriam, Project Manager with GEL. GEL is a global urban design, planning, and strategy firm, and we've been working with the City of Boulder since late 2022 to help them think through how to transform the city streets into more people-centered spaces. So as what was stated, our presentation this evening is going to focus on the evaluation of the summer 2023 Social Streets program, and will include a series of recommendations for how we might envision the evolution of this program moving forward. One small logistical thing before I dive into the presentation is, from our vantage point, is it possible for us to be able to see the presentation screen so that we can know what slides are advancing? Thank you, that's great. So I'll be just calling for a slide to advance. So you can move to the next one. So thank you. So before we dive into the recommendations and the evaluation and all of that, I do want to set a little bit of context for why we are working with the city to reimagine Boulder streets. So really, what are we working to solve and why is that? Next slide. So we first started working with the city at what I'll call a conflicted moment. This was following the moment in which West Pearl was reopened to car traffic, and we know in that moment that Boulder residents had called on the city to rethink that decision and to consider how to continue to close streets for pedestrian use. But we also learned at that time that there was no uniform consensus among both residents and other key stakeholders on how and where to best repurpose streets downtown for that pedestrian activity. Essentially, different groups wanted different things, and we were brought on to help kind of think of a holistic manner to address this demand coming from residents. Next slide. So the city, with our help, developed a strategy to help meet this demand for more pedestrianized streets. So what we did was we conducted a comprehensive site analysis and public engagement effort to determine feasible sites in downtown for street closures in 2023. And what this turned into was the summer 2023 action plan. That was the deliverable from that phase of this work. And in that action plan, we proposed a number of near-term recommended interventions. Not all of these interventions ended up being implemented, but notably, one of the recommendations, which was the routine closure of 13th Street for community events, that ultimately was pursued by the city in collaboration with Downtown Boulder Partnership. And I should mention that a key aspect of our recommendations in this summer 2023 action plan was that street closures should be paired with activation to ensure that we're not just closing streets and hoping that they're filled with activity of people using them, but actually providing a programmatic intent along with the design intent of closing the street to really ensure that there's a successful public life, as we call it in our industry, successful public life being fostered in these spaces. And so this is what led ultimately to the summer event series. Next slide. So once this event series was up and running, we conducted more public and stakeholder engagement, and we did a program evaluation, which we'll share more about with all of you. And that informed our recommendations that you'll hear about at the end of this presentation. But one thing I do want to note is that the summer 2023 program really reflects the urgency of the moment in which it was born. In 2023, the city had to move relatively quickly in order to address that desire for repurposed streets. And it was in this tight time frame that essentially the scope of what Social Streets as a program could be was also necessarily somewhat more limited based off of that time frame. So with this evaluation, the approach that we took in this phase of work was to conduct this evaluation as also a time or an opportunity to imagine what could the transformation of Social Streets be moving forward so that it is better serving the city and its goals long term. Next slide. So the evolution of this program can really be more than just reacting to resident demand for these types of transformed streets. It's really about the role that streets and public spaces broadly play in addressing larger systemic issues like the ones that you see on the screen of economic vitality, well-being and connectedness, inclusivity, social mixing. We know that streets are where people meet, it's where they foster community, grow their businesses, play, exercise, and it's in rethinking this relationship with streets where they're typically seen as primarily spaces for cars. By rethinking this, we can create better people-centered places that can help support local businesses. We can bring people together to kind of vanquish social isolation. We can inspire people to live out their civic ideals by sharing space together and really celebrating Boulder's diversity in the public realm. And I think originally these are the values that were on display with the closing of West Pearl when it was closed to car traffic in the depths of the pandemic. And so now what we're motivated by with our series of recommendations is how do we take those Social Streets program and kind of evolve it, morph it so that it can broaden these same types of impacts throughout all of Boulder and help enable local residents to really steer both where and how these transformations take place. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Helena Wolf, who's also on the line here, and she'll share a bit about our evaluation findings.
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, I'll just walk us through our evaluation here. Next slide, please. Great. So yeah, as Brett was saying, this past summer, Social Streets transformed 13th Street into this temporary event space that hosted 8 unique events through the summer. Brett and I were on site and observed the Dancing in the Street event in July. We also did observations of the area during non-event hours as a benchmark. Our local community engagement partner, Leadline, was on the ground doing community engagement at each event. And then our other partner, Fox Tuttle, did a transportation analysis for the area. So our insights are based on those inputs. Next slide, please. So now I'll take you through our findings. There's a lot of richness on these slides, so for the sake of time, I won't go through everything, but I'll cover the key points. So firstly, the main point of this program was to create a pull into downtown Boulder and a gathering place for people to connect. And that's what this program did. Most people we surveyed would not have been in the area, but for the event. And a huge majority of them felt more connected to Boulder's community after attending an event like this. Next slide, please. Event goers felt both welcomed and included, especially women and children. This is reflected in the fact that we observed 12 times more children under the age of 15 and 4 times more women present during the events compared to the non-event periods. Next slide, please. And overall, people felt safe. But of course, there's always nuance and room for improvement with this type of perception. We found that more than 2/3 of people that we surveyed agreed that events like these make Boulder's public spaces feel safe, which is especially relevant given the location of this event site within the civic area. Next slide. So despite few adjacent businesses, social streets did modestly boost economic opportunity. One of the initial compromises in choosing 13th Street for this summer event series was that it doesn't have a great number of businesses close by or along the street. But nonetheless, the businesses that were a part of the events themselves benefited from being a part of this program. We also found that 3 out of 4 people that came to these events visited a nearby business either before or after the event. So just suggesting that the area of influence for an event like this is wider than the immediate surroundings of the street. Next slide. So close collaboration with community partners spelled event success throughout the summer. We observed that events were particularly successful when community and partners were empowered to really be in the driving seat and when the city facilitated them. There were 2 pretty distinct events that happened this summer that illustrate this fact. The Street Soccer Classic was relatively light touch. It was an all-day event. It took over the entire street. The Melanin Funk Festival, on the other hand, was relatively complex with a lot of partners. It was an evening event and was mostly concentrated in the plaza. But despite these differences, they had shared success factors. They both involved really close collaboration with a community partner. They benefited from a kind of organic event promotion through that community partner. And those 2 things combined ultimately created events that felt inclusive to communities of color that maybe don't have that explicit invitation to spend time in downtown Boulder otherwise. So the involvement of community organizations here was key both for inclusivity and for the event success. So people overall hope that social streets can better empower the public to lead street transformations. The people we talked to, both people that were attending these events and people that understand the inner workings of putting on public events like this, were really aligned around empowering the public to lead. I'll also call out that there was alignment around creating places for the everyday as well as the occasional. So finding that balance between being able to attend an event, but also just have a place to hang out in the day-to-day. And then the transportation analysis that was done, from that we saw there was a minimal impact to driving and actually an increase in both bike and foot traffic during the events. And then as another part of our engagement, we asked people about the kind of investment they want to see based on this visual engagement survey. And the results of that show a pretty strong appetite for kind of bigger and bolder street interventions. So ones that are more transformative, larger scale over ones that are more tactical in nature. Next slide. Great. And then lastly here, just in summary, it was a successful, though imperfect season. Overall, there's enthusiasm and a lot of momentum for continuing to evolve the Social Street program.
Thanks. And Helen, do you mind just introducing yourself and your role, please?
Yes, I'm Helena Wolf, and I'm a designer with Gail and was working under Brett for this project.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Helena. With these insights from this evaluation in mind, we have a number of recommendations for how the Social Streets program might be able to evolve moving forward. Next slide. So the big idea, and we've been saying this maybe throughout the presentation already, is that the next evolution of Social Streets should empower Boulder residents to transform their streets. So we know that the summer 2023 Social Streets event series successfully sparked positive experiences for the people that did attend these events, and it inspired people to want more from their streets. And so what we see as the next step is to morph it into something that's more community-led, sustainable, and equitable. Letting city government really do what it does best, which is supporting its community members to shape Boulder themselves. Next slide. So we have a number of actions that we recommend, which you'll see kind of on the right-hand side of these slides, which are each informed by a number of current conditions or observations or takeaways that we got from our engagement with folks, and that's on the left-hand side of these slides. So looking at this slide here, first, in our evaluation, we found that all stakeholders we spoke to, they really agree that the activations, again, should be community-led and that city government should act as a facilitator rather than as the event planner. The recommendation then is to evolve Social Streets into an application-based program where local groups can apply for city support in transforming streets that they nominate. These groups could be things like, folks like residents, businesses, business improvement districts, nonprofits, and other advocacy groups. They would come up with a concept and apply to the city program to potentially be awarded the resources to make that project a reality. And we should note that there are programs like this that exist in cities all across the US. The full report that we created as the final deliverable of this process has a number of precedents to review. We won't go through them here, but just to note that this is a successful model that we're drawing inspiration from. Next slide. Currently, there are actually already many ways to transform streets in Boulder. There's things like the block party trailer, the outdoor dining pilot, special events permits and street closures for those. But it's our observation that all these programs are housed in different departments within city government, and the public may not really understand or see this as a coordinated, simple program for them to make use of. So what we recommend then is that Social Streets itself becomes this one-stop shop that bundles many different project types under one roof. And so what this program would do is it would have the different elements that I mentioned that Boulder already offers, potentially with some other options for how folks might be able to transform their streets, but they read it as one program under the Social Streets brand. And this program would then be led by an interagency city team, much like how the special review team functions already, and would have a dedicated program manager to administer the program as well. Next slide. So we know that there's a desire also to bring the same type of transformations beyond just downtown. This is something that we heard consistently from engagement with folks who attended these events, saying that they enjoyed being able to have a reason to come downtown. They would love to see something like this closer to home, perhaps. So we envision Social Streets being able to evolve past downtown and really cover all of Boulder. But we also know that certain different types of street changes or transformations might be more appropriate in one part of the city than another. And so for that reason, the city, we believe, should set its own set of priorities as to what types of street transformations it would like to prioritize where based on its own policy goals. And what this could mean then is that the city takes a proactive role in geographically mapping these priority areas to help set the agenda and to create a bit of order to this process of an application-based program. Next slide. We also heard from people that they want to see this continued investment that leads to more lasting spaces for gathering. So the Social Streets program could trigger what we call this, quote, pathway to permanency, where once a temporary installation might be set because an application is put in, it's awarded, it's implemented. Once that happens and the installation is there, the city could then consistently evaluate the pilot to gauge its success based off a number of factors relative to the policy goals that drove to the actual implementation of that intervention. And so from that analysis, from that evaluation, if deemed successful, it could then kick off a capital redesign process that makes the transformation permanent. And so that's this idea of really letting a pilot project grow and mature into something that really informs long-term change that becomes permanent and lasting in the city. Next slide. And lastly, we also know that not all stakeholders are currently aligned on how or where it's best to repurpose streets. However, most are open to this idea, and we've heard from a number of collaborators from this original 2023 program that many are eager to stay involved in this type of program. So while we are recommending that the city changes its role from, again, more as the event planner in 2023, we're saying that they now would shift to more of a facilitator role. It would still require the city to proactively consult with potential applicants to both inform them of the program and also to collaboratively come up with inspiring and feasible ideas together to then kind of keep the liveliness of the program going. And so next slide. Yeah, so really the big idea here is it's something like this umbrella where, the umbrella itself is Boulder Social Streets. And so externally to the public, it's one single program, but underneath that umbrella, there are these different project types that people could be inspired by the idea of and want to try to implement in their neighborhoods or in other neighborhoods of Boulder. And so, like I said, some of these programs, the ones in blue there, are already things that fit under this umbrella, like the block party trailer, the street closures related to special events. But then there's also other types of transformations that could be added to this umbrella. One example here is the pavement to plaza, where a street segment might be completely closed to car traffic and is converted to a plaza. This is essentially what happened in West Pearl during the pandemic. Next slide. And so if social streets was structured in this way, we could imagine a user journey for how someone would go through the process. And so, for example, we have here Alex, who is a fake person, just for illustrative purposes, who for this example is a community, she comes from a community housing partnership in Boulder, and she has the idea where she wants to convert a relatively lesser used residential side street into a plaza where people can gather. So first, what she would do is meet with her neighbors to gather support for the idea. And then she'd submit to an online application that details her concept under the Pavement to Plaza project type. An interagency team in the city government would then review this application and approve it based on its feasibility, its alignment with policy goals and priorities that the city has set, as well as local support for the project. And so then the city would provide urban design solutions to help temporarily convert that street into a plaza. And then it would be up to the local community to program it with the activities and the uses that they would want to, take part in this plaza. And then after a while with this installation installed, the city would then conduct traffic and experiential analyses to determine the impact of what this project had. And if that impact is deemed to be good, the city could then integrate this plaza design into a more permanent position, and it would go into the capital improvement plans for this neighborhood. Next slide. And so lastly, if a program like this was to be developed, we've outlined here a high level timeline. And I should say that this is mostly illustrative, can be totally flexible to, real world realities and what the city needs. But, you could expect a program development like this to take about a year to define. And this would include the identification of funding, determining both the governance and staffing of the program, as well as setting the technical specifications for what types of projects live within the program, what are the parameters, what are the considerations, how does this team go about awarding one project versus another. That would all be part of this program development stage. And during that time too, there would need to be internal cross-departmental coordination to help set those priorities, as well as external stakeholder engagement to solicit input into the development of the program and to inspire people to apply to it. And so all in all, it could be something like a full year of developing the program, and then following the launch of the program for its inaugural season, it could take about, give or take, a year to have people apply, select, and then implement the first round of projects from this. So with that, I believe I'll pass it back over to the fine folks at the city.
Thanks, Brett. Natalie Stifler, Transportation Mobility Director. I'm going to cover next steps. So hopefully you've kind of taken the big takeaway here is that we're really looking for a community-led program, that community comes to us with a desire to activate our streets, and we make that very easy for them. So this year we have staff dedicated and resource dedicated in our work plan to continue to develop this idea. We'll continue some engagement with community about what the level of interest is in activating streets, where across the community, like areas where we already know on the Hill and Boulder Junction and other places that community's interested in. And then we will continue to think about how can we create this umbrella that Brett talked about with the services that we currently provide, and make that easier for people to navigate, and what other things potentially should live under that umbrella. And that also would be based on what we're hearing from community around their interest to activate space. And then thirdly, we'll be looking at just some of the goals and the program characteristics that Brett described in that timeline of how do we kind of develop a citywide program that could be viable for this one-stop shop. So that's the plan for this year's work plan. I think if there's continued interest in us moving forward with this type of program, then we would, in 2025 and beyond, look to resource something that Brett's described in that timeline before. So then that kind of wraps up next steps, and just moving on to the next slide, we have some questions. I know this looks like a lot here, so we can focus in on really just questions or feedback on the technical analysis and then moving forward the interest in the program.
Yeah, thank you for that, Natalie, and for our other speakers. Appreciate the presentation. And I just wonder, like, to make it a little simpler than these questions, maybe we could say, first, what questions do we have of staff? And then after that, we could have comments that could roll up into both some feedback on how the social streets went this last year, as well as what the next steps might be. How does that sound?
That sounds great, yeah.
So then, Council, I'd ask for any questions for city staff first, and then after those are done, we could move into general comments. Nicole.
First, my first question is the word successful that you guys used in this presentation. Brett and Helena, I was at the dance event, and I would say that it was not successful. I don't know if you read there were hardly any people there, and if you read the 300-page report, it kept saying that the vendors and contractors weren't unhappy with the way it went. So I'm curious why you used the word success. You know, it was successful, Melon and Funk. That was truly successful. And I would say soccer might have been, well, I didn't go to that one, but a lot of them were not. So my question is why did you think they were? And I mean it, I'm not being sarcastic, even though I can be sarcastic. Now I'm not being sarcastic.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair question. We would agree that there are certainly kind of ebbs and flows in the quality, I think, of experience between the different events that were produced for the program of the summer season. Our read of success is based on basically the feedback that we received from folks who did attend the events, the quality of experience that they enjoyed participating in it. That to us read as successful. In terms of sheer numbers of attendance, these were definitely much lower than one could expect from other, say, like similarly produced events that happen from Downtown Boulder Partnership in other parts of downtown. They're definitely not hitting that same level of attendance. A lot of that has to do with the newness of a program like this, which often we would, for a program like this to truly take off and succeed, it really does take generally years of repeated attempts with the same kind of programs being offered or different experimentations, but in the same locations. It takes time for these types of activations to really gain their footing in terms of attendance. But again, the reason that we ended up feeling that this was successful was because in our engagement on the ground with the folks who did attend these events, again, relatively fewer than other attendance counts at other events, people really provided positive feedback about the experience that they had when they were at the few events that took place.
Okay. Second and last question, is that all right? Is Matt and I were on the subcommittee, I don't know if you remember, way back when, and we did question that 13th Street was a place you would ever want to have an event, because it certainly isn't anything like West Pearl. I mean, you know, and so many problems over there, mostly that it's so far from the center, from Pearl Street, you have to cross Canyon. Can you remind me why you decided that that was the best location? I know I'm being mean. I'm sorry.
No. Well, and as I think Helena mentioned, it's a compromise. It was having to balance multiple inputs. As we mentioned in the presentation, one of the more challenging aspects of 13th is, as you said, it's a little further from the core of downtown. It's also not, it doesn't have immediately a full double loaded facade of businesses as say West Pearl does. However, one of the main considerations there was impact to traffic. That was the highest rated location for having the least projected impact on traffic. And so that led part of the reasoning. Other parts of the reasoning were its potential inputs that could help drive findings for the civic area plan, knowing that that street in particular is designed, as at least proposed to my understanding, for the civic area master plan to become a shared festival street. This felt like an opportunity to prototype some ideas there and understand the limitations or the success factors there. And then finally, truthfully, there are stakeholder considerations that need to be truthfully considered and valued as part of the input process with who are the impacted parties along certain street segments. And if there's not enthusiastic interest in participating in a street closure program like this, it can actually get in the way of success for certain streets or damage relationships. And so we were being cautious around that as well.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add that was, I think, Brett, you were being very kind with listing all the other reasons, but that last reason was a big driver for us, and that ultimately we wanted there to be success, and there was a big learning from GEL in their work across the world that if you don't have adjacent business support around an activation, then it makes it very challenging to be successful. And so that was a compromise and kind of a balance that we were striking with 13th Street.
Got a follow-up from Lauren?
So if we did choose to continue this, would it be focused on 13th Street? Like, is that, or would we allow other options?
No, and I can take that one, and Brett, feel free to jump in. No, this would be, so as we move forward, we certainly imagine a citywide program that would be, our expectation is that community, like the Melanin Funk Fest and the soccer activation, those were really community-led partnerships that drove the success. And so that was the big learning for us to have a program citywide that's successful, is that those types of community partnerships are coming to us and wanting to get the word out and do the work and activate the space. And we just kind of get out of the way and make it easy for them. So it would be a community-wide program that we'd eventually get to.
Nicole?
Yeah, thanks so much for the presentation and all the time and effort that went into evaluating the program. I think this may be a question for Chris out in the audience. Give you a chance to stand up. Does this type of activation fit into our economic vitality work plan priority as that sort of coming out and being scoped.
Sorry, first time on the new technology. Good evening, Council. I'm Chris Jones, the Director of the Community Vitality Department. Thank you for the question. Absolutely, as indicated in the presentation, a big component of the reason for doing this work is related to economic vitality, activation of space, to generate activity that brings more folks to downtown. So whether it's on 13th Street, the event street on the Hill, Boulder Junction, we do seek to work with our Office of Special Events to make the activation of those spaces a bit more streamlined than folks are currently experiencing. So we already have that in the works. We have folks who are wanting and have been activating spaces in our key commercial centers, and we do seek to improve that process.
Thank you. And that sort of leads into my second question. Thank you for doing that. This is just thinking about kind of trade-offs, especially budget trade-offs as we're thinking about this program. Do you see it as being something that kind of fits into already planned budget? I mean, given we've got a constrained budget, do you see there being trade-offs that may need to be made to continue this?
So yes, when it comes to the ongoing operations, we do have an Office of Special Events. It's an army of one person, Justin Greenstein, who works really hard on everything from the Boulder to the Boulder Creek Fest, Taco Fest, to the Event Street activations, and really trying to facilitate a smooth process. We do have some resources on that facilitation side. When we're looking at the recommendations that are talking about infrastructure changes, making changes to spaces to make more streets easier to activate on that level, that's not the realm that we have resources for currently. And if we wanted to pursue that as a priority, we need to look at trade-offs and future budgets to help make that happen.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yep, Ryan and then Taisha.
Thanks, everybody. So we don't, without Councilmember Wallach here, I'm going to try to channel and ask a couple of cost-benefit questions now that we have you up here too, Chris. So my first is, can you just summarize what, if anything, did we see in terms of new economic vitality, new economic impacts in a positive way that, you know, in some way or another we can measure? And if any, are there things we can show that were the drivers of that? Did we learn anything about what contributed to that?
Thank you for the question. I would, turn to Brett and the consultant team and some of their measures. We did see that the events and the activations in partnership with the Downtown Boulder Partnership are key partners and the folks who actually did a majority of the actual lifting in this work. It brought people to downtown that might not have otherwise spent time downtown, and they did have a more safe or perception of safe experience in a place that we all know and have been hearing a lot about the civic area challenges. And so these are the types of things that we're thinking about in the activation of any of our spaces, is how do we program resources in a way that makes sure that people have a positive experience. And you heard from Brett saying, the measure of success for the folks that did show up, overall, we were hearing positive things about their use of that space in those windows of time. We do know that we've been hearing from the community, particularly in the civic area, that that's not always been the experience that people are having. And so it's something that we're thinking about, not just in the 13th Street space where we tried this program in 2023, but also our other spaces that we have these types of challenges. So again, thinking about activations in Boulder Junction, where we do hear about challenges in this area. How do we help the businesses and the folks who are in those spaces have a better experience and want to spend more time in those spaces to deter maybe some of the more negative experiences that we're hearing about?
Got it. So just to clarify, I'm hearing there was a sense that users had a good experience, but as far as measurable economic improvement, business receipts, anything, do we have anything like that, or is that not in scope?
When it comes to one-off events, it is very challenging to measure a major economic shift. We do have some tools that can dive into that, but I would not say that I would see any measured economic boom from these events.
Understood. Thanks. Okay. Can I go to and then I just something on the cost side? Is that okay if I move? Yeah, it's a question on the cost side. I think this might be for Natalie. Can you, so as far as the recommendations to go forward, I'm just trying to make sense of the cost overall, and both in terms of staff time, like for example, how many new CAN corridors is this? Like if we, you know what I mean, if we don't do this, is that like we can do Folsom in a year quicker, or some way, order of magnitude, to think about how expensive this is in terms of opportunity cost for other things we could do, but then also the direct costs. Like it sounds like there's a big idea about what we could do in new programming. Is there any thoughts to direct costs, like in the budget, what that looks like?
So I think and I don't mean to like kick the can or punt on this, but I think through 2024 is really going to be the opportunity for us to flesh that out a little bit more. Um, I think through Brett's presentation, they did provide some high-level guidelines of what resourcing would look like with a program manager. I think that's probably a pretty obvious need. But as Chris has kind of talked about, I mean, we have some things like the event street and the Boulder Junction event street, and various kind of permitting and application processes to do other types of street activations within the city already. And so there's some level of kind of like process improvement that we're going to be looking at this year to help us understand like what then is some additional need from a resourcing standpoint. So I don't think we have a firm answer yet on that, but certainly there will be trade-offs.
Thank you.
Mark, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, just to add, Natalie did a great job. I think there was a couple questions on the numbers in particular. So for this year, it's 150,000.
Yes, yeah.
Of one-time dollars to help support the continued engagement with community, learn some lessons, look at the process improvement type of stuff. So I think we're really focused on within our means, how we can realize some of the recommendations, again, realizing that the full set of recommendations are really an ideal state. In terms of resourcing beyond what we currently have, that will be a 2025 budget conversation. But I think we're really focused on the internal processes. How can we get out of the way and help support some of these activities within the capacity that we currently have?
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up on that? Just in terms of on costs there, so I've got in the memo that last year the cost of the program was $173,500. And do you have a sense of how many hours of staff time were also spent on the program? Does anybody have a sense of that?
I can tell you there was a lot of staff time. I mean, I think it was a multi-department project, right? So we had staff from 4 departments working on this weekly because it was such a tight turnaround to build these partnerships and just figure out how we were going to activate the space over the entire summer. And obviously GEL was a great resource in that, but there was a lot of staff time over the last year to activate the space. And that's really part of why some of the learning was that the best way to do this is probably not a top-down approach. That's why, in addition to just the success of the events, it really needs to be community-led. It probably doesn't make sense for 5 departments or 4 departments to be staffing a 20-person team and trying to activate the space top-down.
Great point. Thanks. I've got Taisha. You have follow-ups? Okay, and then I got few people in the queue too.
Sorry, this is related to budget. So for the budget allocation for this year, what sort of visible product will be produced? Like, are we going to activate the space again this summer?
I'll punt to that. Someday I'll pick the budget thing, but I think Natalie can give you a better idea of the 2024 activities for this year.
Yeah, we do not plan to activate space with the existing budget. Our hope for that budget is to really be able to do more engagement with community and understand what it is that we need to change within our existing process to just make it easier. We may also do some analysis around like what zones we should be considering beyond our existing infrastructure around event streets. But those would be kind of the 2 focuses right now. And then obviously looking internally at our processes.
All right, I got Taisha, Tina, and Matt.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I have lots of questions, so I'm just gonna go boom, boom, boom on all of them, and then whoever needs to jockey for responses, we can do that. So, I'm gonna start with research and evaluation. Okay, so I thought that we had discussed the importance of disaggregating demographic information. And I have to say, it was hard to see once again myself erased from a report as an African American Black person in our city. I need to understand why we didn't disaggregate by all races per best equitable research practices that we had already previously discussed. So that's one. on research evaluation, I also would love to see an actual breakdown of those 10 active participants because, again, the current way that the information is presented is actually a way that masks and shadows who actually was represented. So just for a note of transparency, I'm just curious why we, is there more information available or can we get that? Okay, so that's evaluation, research and evaluation light. The next piece is on just in general our arts and culture portfolio. So I was very curious after reading 300 and something pages, how does this work fit into the larger efforts that we're already doing in this area, in the ways that we engage community in events and culture and all of these kinds of things? Basically, is this a value add to the portfolio that we already have, and in what ways? Like, how does this fill existing gaps in our current services around arts and culture so that it's not a standalone project, but rather integrated into a larger portfolio? So just curious about that relationship between this project and the larger arts and culture portfolio. Next question, was the Arts Commission engaged in this process, and in what way, and if so, in what ways? Next question.
And Taisha, do you want to get answers as we go along here?
No, I'm just going to give the whole list, and we may not have time for all of them, so I just want to kind of get out the big bucket ones, and I also want to hold space for other members who may have questions.
Appreciate that.
Why informed and consult is there? Oh, I noticed in your in the engagement framework there was only inform and consult, when actually, based on what you just shared on the Melanin Funk Fest and the other one that was very community-led, community-driven, we actually are in the collaboration section. So I feel like we should get credit for when we're actually in a collaborative place with our community members. This is actually an example of meaningful collaboration on that framework, and I just would love to make sure that we are actually acknowledging that alignment. So I'm just kind of curious why the decision was made to have those ratings and not that larger rating. So I will give a pause, and I will end with the racial diversity. I noticed that there was a whole section on racial diversity, and then the next section was on stakeholder and business engagement. So my question is, was the Latino Chamber and the Equity Amplification Program, which is Black businesses in our area, engaged in this work around the economic vitality, et cetera? So those are all of my questions. Feel free to answer what you can. Thank you so much.
So maybe we can have the answers you have right on hand, and maybe
Yeah.
get back to her and us with some of the others that require more detail.
That sounds good. Yeah. And I'll look to Brett maybe if you want to speak to some of the data and engagement questions. And then Chris and Matt will take the arts and culture ones.
Yeah, definitely. I think points well taken, and thank you for raising them. I will say intentionally the presentation that we as GEL are providing today intentionally brought together a lot of different inputs, including the stakeholder and public engagement that occurred at the events as one input to be then kind of told in this more impressionistic manner that also took into account other types of observation and analysis that we as urban designers did on site, as well as the transportation analysis. So this is to say that I do know that there is a separate engagement report that was a part of the final product that came out of this work that completed in, I believe, October of last year. So while the presentation today does not disaggregate across all of those different demographic factors, I believe there's a more fulsome engagement packet that does go into this. I will say the engagement itself that occurred at these sites did skew more white and affluent. This had to do with the nature of just on-site engagement of asking folks who are attending an event to take time out of their experience of the event to share their feelings of the event as well. So we recognize that it's not a perfect engagement method in order to get a fully representative sample. So I do want to just name that that is a true reality of this engagement that did take place.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams, for the question related to arts and culture. So it's really timely, actually, in the sense of the three strategic pillars of the Community Vitality Department are cultural vibrancy, district vitality, and access for all. And we really see that this social streets interdepartmental project really did touch on all three of those things. And we've gone through a recent restructure in the department where our Office of Special Events moved into our cultural vibrancy arm led by Matt Jazansky. I would note that a majority of the activations that we experienced last year were funded through CAGID funds, the Central Area General Improvement District, and so those funds are actually administered through our Downtown Management Commission. So we did spend a lot of time with that commission on this particular project. Moving forward, now that we have done this restructure, I would see, of course, especially with new funding possibly being available and maybe spent on activations depending on community desires, that the Arts Commission would be very much involved. Happy to invite Matt up to provide more information on that, but thanks for the question.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Matt Jazansky, and I work with the Community Vitality Department in the Office of Arts and Culture. And to answer your first question about how this fits in with the cultural plan and the environment, there's really four ways. The first is there are existing arts programs, arts nonprofits that program in the public realm. And we've heard from them that there needs to be a path cleared for that to be easier and better for their organizations. And I think that a lot of the information we received and the plans for this can do that work. The second is that our cultural plan calls for the community to have more ability to both affect the environment with their creativity, but also to encounter the arts. And so this does that as well. And then there was the Experiments in Public Art program that was part of the programming mix for this. And that can be something that in the future can be a really great way to deploy the arts for all sorts of different things. But then also back to the economic vitality questions, when we focus that in on the arts, that hosting arts events in the public realm in programs like Boulder Social Streets can have a rippling effect out to cultural tourism and the engagement of residents and community members with arts and culture nonprofits and arts businesses. And so we see like all of those aspects coming together in a program like this could be benefits.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I'm hopeful in future reports that there is a stronger alignment to our existing strategies and priorities so that, that could be, seen. And I would have appreciated having that in the report so that I understood the alignment to our larger priorities. So thank you for that additional information. Also, IT, is it possible to turn up the sound? I'm on the struggle bus hearing, and I would just love to have a little bit more, not, of my voice, but like I'm struggling to hear them. Thank you.
Okay, I got Tina and then Matt, and then hopefully we can move to comments here soon.
Yeah, thank you for all this information. And like Tara, I also went to an event this summer. I went to the Roller Palooza, and it was a great idea, but it was definitely poorly attended. So I have some similar concerns about how we're going to measure success in the future. But with that being said, one of my concerns is when we just think about how to cost out what the cost might be, if we're going to switch to a format that is community-led, I think that, and we think about the cost for the city to put on these events was $170,000. I would like to make this accessible to different types of people in the community and realize that there might be a financial subsidy that the city gives to some groups when they present their idea. So whether we choose to pursue that, I don't think we're there yet. I'm not hearing that this is on our agenda for, even next year yet. However, I would like to have an option where we can choose to add money so that a whole different groups of the community can participate, because my gut feeling is that it's going to be expensive to activate a street, whether it's downtown or whether it's up in North Boulder, and there are costs that come out of this, so I don't want it to favor just certain groups. So that would be my only thought as we move forward.
Did you have a question there? No. Okay, that's fine. Oh, well, then thanks for that, Tina. Matt?
I thought we were on comments. I'm sorry.
We're still in questions.
Appreciate it. One of the things I'm hearing, which sort of leads to a question, is where does Boulder Social Streets fit into a larger cohesive plan? We've got the downtown vision plan, we've got Hill downtown connection, we've got the CAN downtown corridor study, we've got the arts and culture plan coming, we've got overall Hill revitalization with 2 hotels starting, and what I don't know is where does this fit in a larger plan? Because I think to some extent maybe Social Streets is siloed into its own thing. So I'm wondering that if there's a larger cohesive plan that touches on this in all areas, I think it might be easier for us to coalesce around what the strategy is and then what the necessary investment is. So I'm just sort of wondering how is this threaded into the array of plans that all touch, or where Social Streets has a role potentially.
I'm happy to take this one and let my colleagues jump in. So I think Social Streets, and Brett can even, I'm sure, speak to this in just his experience in cities. The idea is really, I mean, through Civic Area Phase 2, I think we're going to see opportunities where like street activation could really make sense. And so if we develop a social streets program that really makes it easy for community to activate space, then and not super expensive, like Tina, spoke to, then things like Civic Area, like there, you start to see that tie together where we've created a space through Civic Area Phase 2 that enhances that space, and Allie could talk to that better, but that space would be enhanced and then people would want to activate it, and then we've created a city process that makes it easier for that to occur. Same with, let's take CAN, right? If we make the downtown streets a more multimodal and accessible and safe space, then that will lead potentially to people wanting to activate that in a way that we haven't thought of before, to transform those streets on some temporary or somewhat permanent basis. And that would happen through a program that we've created to make it easy for them to do that. So that's where I think you see those things start to tie together. It's not like Boulder Social Streets lives in Civic Area or lives in CAN. It's an overall city framework that as we make improvements across the city, things start to tie into that if there's an opportunity for it.
I appreciate that. And maybe I can ask a specific thing to sort of your lane in transportation along those lines, and maybe like where the CAN down the corridor study comes in is, would the desire and community request at a pretty large fraction wanting to socialize our streets play a role in how aggressively or how imaginative that corridor study looks at, say, for instance, like unlocking the one-way loop downtown as a means of freeing up the space to achieve that socializing of public space and streets. And so I'm just wondering, how does having that being a threat or a goal liberate these other plans to really think imaginatively versus them maybe being social streets being sort of siloed and kind of a somewhat awkward stepchild to all of those pieces?
Yeah, I think it gets back to our SARE framework goal around accessible and connected. And if that's the, goal for everything that we're doing when it comes to our streets, right, then I think when we are doing downtown CAN mobility study work in a year or two, that will be top of mind, and that then makes it, easier when somebody wants to do something through social streets.
All right, thanks, Matt. And did you have a follow-up, Lauren?
Well, not a follow-up, just a question. So I get that the information in there was not statistically valid, but I was still struck by that sort of the pavement to plaza option was the top way that people thought streets could improve moving forward. And I was wondering, and of course, I would want more data, better data on that before we did anything. But I was wondering if this program allowed for what sounds like people are interested in more permanent street closures.
Brett, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that input is why we felt compelled as part of that umbrella to include pavement to plaza as a recommended project type within this social streets framework. And somewhat also to speak to the previous question too, I mean, I think the value of a program like this from a transportation planning standpoint, but also from a sort of public life experience standpoint too, is the role in which you can experiment with pilots that then ideally, and this is the pathway to permanency piece, that ideally start to give clues to the city or to decision makers in a public sector role about where to invest. And by getting folks interested in, say, we're getting a lot of response from the residents of Boulder for a pavement to plaza type program in this area of the city, that's actually perhaps a clue to continue down that path and to temporarily test a pilot of that type of typology, and based off of the evaluation of its success, which of course is needing to be defined, as we've talked about I think today, that could then lead to this pathway to permanency in which the pavement to plaza program takes it from a temporary plaza to maybe something even more permanent, or some type of renewed street that is maybe not fully a plaza but incorporates greater public space for pedestrians and others. So all to say, yes, pavement to plaza is intentionally included in this program based off of those responses. And I think the potential to temporarily try out that type of treatment to streets as a way to then imagine more permanent transformation.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So why don't we move to comments here? If people want to give some feedback on the program from last year, you're welcome to, but also how we might see this going forward. Is the proposal that's kind of in front of us something that people are interested in, or perhaps a different version of it? Would love to hear council's thoughts in hopefully fairly succinct, because it's getting late. I have thoughts, but who else would like to? Do you want to start? All right, I'll go ahead and call on myself. Anyway, so I want to thank all the city staff who were involved in this program in the last year. It was, as you mentioned, it was a huge amount of work, right? And it was very creative. The different ideas were super cool, and so really appreciate the thought and the effort that went into it, and also from our consultant team as well. I will say I went to several of them. I thought, echo what Tara said, the Melon and Funk Fest was hugely successful, but the other couple that I went to were pretty dead. There just wasn't a lot of activity. I think some of the people who came, I think, had a decent time, but like if you look at an attendance of 200 scattered throughout 5 hours for a day that's costing on average $20,000, I feel like the cost benefit wasn't really there in terms of the effectiveness of the program. And to Ryan's point about opportunity costs, this was a cool idea. We tried it. I don't know that it did work out. And also there was the evolution of like, this was the next step after the West Pearl closure, which people just loved, but wasn't working for the businesses. So, okay, fine, we won't do that. But I don't think this kind of got to what people loved about the West Pearl closure. So again, hugely appreciate all the effort that went into it. So what I'm wondering in terms of next steps, great point about the pavement to plaza being, I think, what stood out to people, because I think that does get at what people loved about the West Pearl closure. We do already have ways to have block parties. We do already have ways to close a street for 6 hours. We have permits for these things existing. But if we could create something maybe that was kind of quick and nimble about having people propose that a section of street in their neighborhood could either be closed or altered, and you could try it for a couple days, and if it's working out, it could maybe move into something more permanent. But if we could do it in kind of a simple way, like not an FTE and a year of putting together criteria, but something more straightforward where we could evaluate it on a simpler basis and not spend $150,000 on it. That would be my thought. Can we do something quick and nimble that gets at that essence of what people loved without some of the complexities that we introduced and I would really love to see it stop impacting so much staff time too, because you all have so much to do and we have so many priorities. So that's kind of my thinking, and I welcome other council members' input. Taisha.
Thank you. I really appreciated the grants component and the efforts to reduce the bureaucratic burden of that, and I think that that's something that can be applicable to all of the work that we do. So thank you for lifting that up. I am interested in not necessarily the program as it exists right now, but just when I went to high school in Brooklyn, block parties are awesome, and usually neighborhoods just put it together with the lawn chairs. I mean, you know what I mean? And so I would love to see that kind of thing happen in other parts of the community. But I understand why this particular location was selected. I will say I attended a few of them, including arts and the Melanin Funk Fest. And one of the goals or objectives of this project was to test programs. And so we tested them. Some of them worked. And so I just don't understand why we wouldn't continue those that were hugely successful. And I'll, again, speak to the Melanin Funk Fest as an African-American Black person who lives here coming on 13 years. That is the first night activity that I have ever experienced and participated that was outside the month of February, right? Right? And so I'm hopeful that we actually can consider, because I'm so tired of us having something, it be amazing, and then we don't do it again. So that's not how we build public trust. And in my opinion, if there are that, and I'm also grew up a soccer player, if the soccer event was also successful, why should they be penalized? I don't know what their specific price points were. It also would have been helpful to see the budget of each of the projects and not just this one big number. I don't know if it was in there. I didn't see it. I really did read all the pages. But just again, to understand, of the 100,000 or so, how much did it cost for each of those events? And I suspect that Melanin Funk Fest was quite expensive just based on what it was. But of all the events, that one felt like, oh, this is a good place to have this, right? Like you actually did need that space. It also was nice to have night events. I was at the Visit Boulder, I participated in the Visit Boulder board meeting yesterday, and we were talking about getting folks downtown and all the things at night. And so this was actually an event that got people back in at night. And so I would encourage us to reconsider eliminating programs that actually were successful in this project. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Taisha. And just to add to what I totally agree when I said the Melanin Funk Fest was successful. I would love to see another event of that type happen again, for sure. I've got Tina, Matt.
Yeah, I really like this idea of making it easy for some events. So it could be that the Melanin Funk Fest is a good way for us to create that pathway where if a group is interested, they can do something on an existing open street, but maybe without staff time. And then I'll just point out that the farmers market is really active every Saturday and Wednesday. It's a street closure. There's huge community interest. So just thinking also about how that has been a real success with our street activation and how can we carry that forward into other neighborhoods or that same concept. That's just a different example. And then the final thing is there are other communities that do really good projects. When one is, of course, the Sidewalk Chalk Festival in Denver, which is an amazing event. So I wouldn't want to close the option. So this idea that we could do things that are simple, I think is great. And I'd love to see that, but without doing the FTE that we spent last year.
Thanks, Ryan, then Matt.
Okay, I'm also very appreciative of all the work, Brett, Helena, Natalie, Chris, the 4 department staff, and others who worked on this. And absent costs and opportunity costs, it feels positive, and I appreciate that when something's new, it takes time to get going. But I think on the question of what now, we should really look at the big picture. And I would like to think about that first slide that discussed the West Pearl origin, and I thought that was a really good kind of beginning point. And if you'll permit me a metaphor, I kind of think of this, there was a little bit of a settlement agreement in that West Pearl exercise in which there was so much community enthusiasm to try to meaningfully transfer space from cars to people on a permanent basis. And that I recall there was sort of a response that was like, well, we could, but the conditions aren't right, just quite right here, so let's take it somewhere else. And to me, that's kind of the origin story of this. And so I think, when I imagine at that point, whatever that's a couple years ago, A big idea was like, let's look for permanent changes we can make that will fundamentally reallocate space. And I feel like there's a gap between that kind of intent, and there may have been other intents, but that was one of them in my mind. And between that and some of the discussion I heard about kind of like trying to be unobtrusive to drivers and in this exercise. And I think maybe that's because the exercise was simply scoped that way, and that's fine. So what did we learn and what to go forward? I have a few points. One, this was a very events-focused initiative, and I think one thing it showed us is that we should have confidence that people want this, that they want to come out downtown and use space that are currently used for cars, and the sky doesn't fall. So that's first thing. Second thing, I like the pathway to permanence thinking in a way, but given where we started, it feels like it's doing a lot of gymnastics to get to a point of just making direct changes to create infrastructure, which I think we have the power to do a lot more quickly. So that leads me to the third thing, and I'll pick up on something Councilmember Benjamin said, which is, we have so many initiatives in the downtown area. Civic Area Study, All Things Downtown, the Hill Connection, which is now priority for work plan, the activities with the Limelight and other activities around CU, Downtown Can Study, Arboretum, comments we heard today about parking issues on the trailhead that interconnect with some of our transit opportunities in all that space. And so I'm usually not somebody who says we need to do more planning, but I do think this is a case where we would benefit from a more integrated plan regarding what we're trying to do within this geographic area of something like downtown to the Hill with trailhead access, or you could amend that if you debate the boundaries of that, but something like that space that would give us a map of what are the public spaces we're going to build, where are the bikeways, what does the redesigned transit look like, do we want that one-way loop going around town, where will we have public spaces and plaza and a park, in order to create an infrastructure that we could then build from. I think that's, to me, the most obvious thing we should be focusing on. I know that would take some additional effort, but that's where I would like to see us go. And then just the final thing is there was a question regarding beyond downtown, how to think about this. And I just think clearly we need to build a polycentric, city with different geographies. But I feel like that at this point, one of our tasks is to focus on getting this area right, and then let's treat other geographies as we go. And I'm excited about the potential for this kind of a program, but I do think some kind of an integrated plan, holistic plan for our downtown area, bringing everything together, trying to do is something it's probably our biggest opportunity.
Thanks, Matt.
Appreciate that. And having been on this committee, I just want to express a lot of gratitude for, big lift for a lot of folks. We had a lot of meetings about trying to figure out where to go with this, Chris, and same with Brett and Natalie and others. So I'm grateful for the work. And not everything we embark on as a city has to be a smashing success. And sometimes when it's not is actually where we learn the most. And I think this is kind of the case of that. And so I don't think there's any reason for anybody on this dais or its staff or in the community to hang their head low and think of this as a failure or anything like that. I actually don't think that's the case. I think this was a necessary evolution for us to go through this exercise to understand what the limits are but also what the potential is going forward. So I'm grateful for those efforts for staff and everybody. And with that being said, I think one of the lessons we learned is we can't activate in a vacuum. And that's, I think, what 13th taught us, is it is not an active space unless we pour heavy resources to activate it. Whereas places like West Pearl, the Hill, and Boulder Junction can be immensely activated with a light lift because the areas are already active by infrastructure. They're social by nature. And I think that's maybe the theme of what we want to go forward is streets should be social in nature, not by activation. And I think that's where we want to focus our efforts. And I think, the way we kind of touch on that is process improvements. I think we take the spaces we have and we streamline it. I keep coming back to a wedding venue. The Hill space, Boulder Junction, We'll get there on West Pearl, but these should all just be like a wedding venue where it is literally like, how many people? 100? Here's how many trash cans. Here's how many CSOs. Here's how many tents you need. Here's how much water you need. Go. Oh, I need 500 people. Check, check, check. It should be that streamlined, that simple. It should already be pre-measured. We don't need to have people running out with tapes. We know the spaces. So these are things that I think can simplify it, to Aaron's point, and lower the barrier of entry. But in doing so, I think we run into a staff challenge. Justin is already maxed. And if we're going to lower the barrier of entry and make it easier for people to do things, Justin alone won't be able to manage those projects. And so I think we still need to keep in mind the FTE, because I don't think we can have our cake and eat it in this instance of making it streamlined, but then not have the staff to support that added work that will come to them. So I think we need to be realistic with what we're asking is, if we want more activation from community, there will still need to be staff time to support that. Not everyone's going to be a professional event planner. And if we have a streamlined process, we need someone in staff to walk them through and grease those tracks. So I think we need to still think about what that FTE is, because if the goal is to have streets that are social by nature, staff needs to walk them through that. And lastly, I'll just, again, I want to come back to that because I think it's a theme. Streets should be social in nature. I'm a little worried about community driving some of these events, because I think those concepts, again, are siloed into their own concept, not feeding into a larger cohesive vision for that space. So I just want to be mindful for that. It might be a really cool idea, but it may not fit the larger vision that we have for that space. And at the end of the day, we should be building streets socially that are focused on people, not cars. So I'll leave it at that. But thanks again for everybody's work, and really appreciate working with you on that, and hopefully more work to come.
Nicole, Lauren, Tara.
Thanks. I want to also just thank everybody for all the work and time that went into this, and thanks to the consultants too. I would really like to figure out how we can make it easier for community groups to do fun things. And I think to your point, Matt, I feel like community groups generally know what it is that they're looking for, things that are not there, that really should be there more frequently. So I would support anything we can do to make the permitting or just the process easier for community groups, especially within the economic vitality work plan priority. So that's where we'll already be directing some staff time and effort. We'll be engaging our racial equity tool. I think all the right things will be happening in that space. So it feels like a good space to explore this to me. I'm really not interested in kind of spending a lot of extra money or staff time that's going to take away from other priority areas as we move forward. So as we can fold this into existing things, I think that's, in our constrained environment, it's likely a good place to be. I really appreciated Taisha's question about whether this would fill existing arts and culture gaps. To me, I think that's one of the crucial questions to be thinking about as we move this forward. Love the idea. Taisha, you brought it up. Matt and Chris, you both talked to it about involving the Arts Commission and thinking about how we can use that as a way to really drive any gaps that may be there. And I think just promoting this idea of encouraging people to use existing spaces in new ways. And as we move forward, I trust staff will be doing all this within our sustainability, equity, and resilience framework, and thinking about how we can use programs like this to work on creating healthy and thriving communities. So I know that's part of our budget, so we'll see that when it comes back. But I think there's some really good information that's coming out of this, and ways that we can bring our community together and empower our community to do more of this bringing people together kind of work. But thank you for all the work that went into it. And yeah, just echoing the comments about the Melon and Funk Fest. I did not go to the soccer one, but that one's one of my favorite groups was there. It was a wonderful evening. So I hope we can do more of those things as we move forward. Thanks.
Thanks. Lauren, and then Tara.
Yeah, I'm going to echo quickly what some of my other colleagues have said. So I heard nothing but positive things about the Melon and Funk Festival, and I would fully support trying to make that continuing happen again in the future, and making maybe that a yearly thing. I would also really like to see an integrated plan for making easy, cost-effective event planning, sort of street closure, because our current street closure program is not either of those things, having utilized it before. I have a hard time in this constrained budget environment committing significant funds, but I fully support what Nicole was speaking to with finding overlap with existing processes and boards. I did quickly want to touch base on something that was probably needs a follow-up email for, but I have a lot of internal conflict with us talking about trying to make these events permits easier and things on 13th Street, while I've been hearing from community around the difficulty that they're having getting permits for services for the unhoused at the band shell. And so I would be interested in hearing more from a staff perspective of what is going on there and why. I know that doesn't directly relate, but thank you for that.
First, I want to apologize if I was mean. That's number one. He's like, no, it was, I don't think, I agree with Matt. There's nothing wrong with saying these two events are great and the rest were not really great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. I think at the retreat, I said, I wish we had more pros and cons. There's nothing wrong with saying this is good, this didn't work out. You know what I mean? So I don't want you to take offense, Brett, and where's the other person? Elena, please don't take offense. I was just trying to be real, because then we can, we could solve problems easier when we do that. So thanks. That's the first thing. But I do appreciate what you said. Somebody said that the problem with social streets was that isn't a social street at this point. I read almost that entire very long packet, and one of my favorite lines was from what was her name? Pecha? She said, she said, when events are created in places where people do not go, there seems to be a major lack of attendance. So right. So I think that we should keep that in mind for the future. Really, it's true. I mean, you can't activate spaces that people don't go to. I mean, you can, and something as successful as Melon and Funk is because the community was involved and it's a great band, etc. So I did want to say that, and I also want to say this is not relevant at all, but I spent a lot of time with chalk drawing on the sidewalk in Brooklyn. We could have an entire festival be free. Just take out your chalk and write on your sidewalk. Okay, forget it. I agree with my colleagues about everything else. Process easier, time and money. We don't want to do a lot of that. The staff spent so much time doing this job. It was incredible. And so I think I feel so guilty how much time was spent compared to how much we got in return, so to speak, and how low the attendance was. When you read some of the stuff in this packet, I felt bad for the vendors. They spent hours there with very few people coming to their trucks. So, I mean, having an unsuccessful event does have a big impact on a lot of people, including the people who are trying to get involved. And also, it's kind of a bummer to go somewhere and there's like not a lot of people there. It's kind of a downer. And we want not a downer here. So that's pretty much, we want uppers. No, not literally. But anyway, that's what I have to say. So kudos to staff, and I hope you didn't take my words in the wrong way, but I meant it for good. I did.
Thanks, Tara. Follow-up from Nicole?
Yes, I just had one really quick thing that I forgot to say. I just wanted to, I'm wondering if we can get a thanks to the community partners who helped us put these on. So for example, Yvette Rollins helped put on the Melon and Funk Fest, which we have all been raving about tonight. So I expect that you all have some way of getting through to some of those organizers, but it would be really awesome just to let them know that we greatly appreciate everything they did to put on these events.
Great point. All right, I think that's everybody. So I'll look to you all, and our feedback was a little bit mixed, but do you have a sense of what next steps based on this feedback might be?
We were listening closely, a mix of feedback, but I think we heard some consensus around leaning into the process improvement and really focusing on that, maybe less on intensive new resources to support the broader program, at least at this stage. we'll review all of the feedback that we heard tonight. I think there's opportunities for us to look at the successes of some of the events that we did conduct in 2023, and just appreciating some of the comments around the realities of staff capacity to do programming. And I think that's where some of the resource intensity comes into play. So appreciate a little bit of grace as we try to respond to that. I think that the thoughts around process improvement are what we can take back and really focus in on some of those elements of the recommendations. And then I'm presuming we'll continue to have this conversation with City Council in the coming months.
That sounds great.
And I will just add, I was remiss in not introducing Ben Manabog. He was our senior project manager on this project after we had somebody leave the city early on. So he's been our fearless leader facilitating the process. So thank you, Ben.
Thanks for your work, Ben. Thanks for coming tonight. All right, that is the end of our agenda.
Wait, what about, isn't there something from the council or something at the end? You know, there's like that list of just like random, there's nothing in particular. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm still not sure when to bring these things up, because obviously we have the CAC and that's great, but things happen between the CAC meeting and now. So I thought there was like a matters from council or something in there at the bottom end. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so there's matters from the mayor and members of council. Generally, that would be where something got scheduled in from CC, but at the end of the meeting, if there's something that you want to bring up that's separate from the agenda, you're welcome to say a few words at the end, which is right now.
Awesome.
Your chance.
Thank you kindly. I just wanted to lift up the incredible work of Topher Downham and Mark Davidson, who co-presented at the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Partner in the Outdoors Conference about our city's efforts around accessibility in our parks and open space. And I just, again, want to thank them for a spark that is literally going across our entire state. But I also want to lift up that they continue to raise issues and barriers for our disabled communities, not only accessing our open space and parks, but also just our public spaces in general, like having the bathroom, how they have the baby change tables. But unfortunately for our communities that, have adults that need to use those types of equipment, those are only 70 pounds or less. And so, again, that's just one example. And of course, in our historic districts, we have, unfortunately, a scenario where our wheelchair-bound residents and visitors have to go into the back to enter a restaurant, as opposed to having a ramp that gives them dignity in entering the front door. And so again, I want to both commend the efforts that we are making and the impact that we are having, not only in our community, but around the state and the country. But I also want to lift up that there's still significant work that needs to be done for our disabled community, as well as our senior community. Thank you so much for this time.
Thanks, Taisha. Any other final thoughts? Well, I will just say welcome members of our fire department who've stayed with us here for the whole meeting. And so I encourage council members to go over and say hi once the meeting is adjourned. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I will go ahead and gavel is closed here at 9:38 p.m. Thanks, everybody.